Yeah. Very good afternoon to everyone. Thank you so much for coming back. So let us start with actually the one item which is like a bit of leftover from the morning, but I think it's a very important item, so we want to start with that. So that then this is agenda item 8, status of agencies' compliance with minimum requirement on the AML-CFT. I would like to invite Françoise and the team to come and present the paper.
Thank you, Chair. Last December, the Council approved minimum requirements for agencies on anti-money laundering and combating the financing of terrorism, referred to as AML-CFT, and requested agencies to certify that they meet those minimum requirements or to present a time-bound action plan to achieve compliance. As of May 16th, all agencies had responded to the Council request. 17 agencies presented a self-certification of compliance without reservations. The Inter-American Development Bank has recently adopted an AML-CFT framework, and it expects to fully implement the associated controls by 2020, as explained in Annex 2, following which the agency stands ready to revisit its compliance with the GEF's minimum requirement. As indicated last December, the process of self-certification by agencies was designed to ensure a timely rollout of the new minimum requirement on AML-CFT. Looking forward, there are further steps. The Secretariat is carrying out a comprehensive review of the GEF's minimum fiduciary standards with a view to presenting an updated policy for Council consideration later this year. If approved, an updated policy on minimum fiduciary standards would require a complete third-party assessment of agencies' compliance, including on the point of AML-CFT. Thank you.
Thank you, Françoise. Let me open the floor for your comments and questions. Elizabeth? Sorry, Munenari. Big difference, sorry about it.
It's okay. Also, thank you, Madam Co-Chair. First, I'd like to thank the staff for presenting to us the results of the self-assessment by the GEF agencies regarding their compliance with the GEF AML-CFT policies. As we all know, GEF is an internationally active financial mechanism, so it receives money from its donors and distributes the money to recipient countries through its agencies. So, unless the GEF or its agencies have a robust AML-CFT framework, the money it receives from the donors could eventually be transferred to the hands of terrorists or crime syndicates. Therefore, I would welcome any additional effort made by the staff to further strengthen the AML-CFT framework. And in this regard, I would certainly welcome the introduction of the third-party assessment of agencies' compliance as suggested by the staff paper. Thank you.
Thank you, Munenari. Now I will call on Elizabeth.
Perfect. Thank you very much. The United States is pleased by the progress being made towards the implementation of this policy, which is an extremely important policy to have in place to protect the fiduciary oversight of our resources. We thank the agencies that self-certified for doing so. In addition, we thank the Secretariat for coordinating this effort. To be more specific, we reviewed the EBRD's self-certification and do have some concerns. We believe that they are acting in good faith, but will interact with them bilaterally on some follow-up questions. We look forward to the full third-party assessment of agencies' compliance with the GEF's minimum AML-CFT standards, including the EBRDs, following the approval of an updated fiduciary standard later this year. In addition, we look forward to the IDB's certification next year. We thank the Secretariat for carrying out a comprehensive review of the GEF's minimum fiduciary standards, and we look forward to considering the standard update at the next Council meeting. Thank you.
Thank you. May I call on Marita, followed by Peter.
Thank you, Chair. We welcome the report and the fact that most of the agencies meet the minimum standards for AML CFT. We would like some clarification, like others, on the status of the World Bank and the IDB regarding their respective compliance with the minimum standard. And also, with regard to the IDB, we are aware that they have adopted a new framework and that it's under implementation, but it would be of interest to know what the status is today, if it is possible to say something about that. Thank you.
Thank you. May I call on Peter?
Thank you. Naoko, I'll be very brief. Echoing colleagues who've spoken before me, very important issue, and as I've mentioned in previous interventions, the question of reputational risk is one that resonates strongly with my government. So while ever I should say we can support the proposed decision, but just want to note that while ever the Inter-American Development Bank has reviews of its compliance framework in place, that reputational risk is greater than we would like, so we would encourage that to be dealt with as expeditiously as possible. Thank you.
Thank you. I just like to know if the representative of the IDB or the World Bank are available for contribution.
World Bank.
Okay, World Bank, please.
Thank you. We would like to inform the Council members that we did submit a certification letter apologizing for having submitted after the original deadline requested by the Secretariat. The certification letter is available, however, as it is posted and confirms full compliance. Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have an IDB representative? Okay. All right, Apana, thank you.
I'm just stepping into the breach. There seems to be some silence. So basically, I would like some clarification, stating first that we support strongly this agenda and the fact that we satisfy ourselves as to the maintenance of adequate minimum fiduciary standards. In para 4 of the paper before us, it is mentioned that an updated policy would require a complete third-party assessment. I would like to understand whether this will be in place of the self-certification or if it will be in addition, and what is going to be the prescribed frequency of self-certification. Thank you.
Thank you for the question.
The third-party assessment will be done after the self-certification. It obviously clears a higher level of certification. And the idea in having the sequence of a self-certification followed by a third-party certification was mostly with the view of providing an expedite answer at a preliminary level from all agencies. So it will be in place and will report back and it will provide a higher level of due diligence on the same subject. Yeah.
Thank you so much. Actually, the situation here is that we couldn't find an IDB who could give you that this latest to answer to your question that when you will be or they will be ready. So that with this situation that we have asked them to come back as soon as possible, so that maybe we could just post it until that later this afternoon. That luckily that again we have this homework session this afternoon, so it's going to be fifth homework. So maybe we need to deal with it. But I just want to make sure that that would be your last kind of question on this session. So as far as you get the clarity from the IDB about the current status, their status, you will be ready to adopt this decision. I mean, okay, right. So with that clarification, that let us give them maybe 2 hours or so, so that they can come back to you and with further information. Oh, Marjorie?
Well, I thought I heard you say that this is the final chance to ask questions, but maybe I didn't hear
on this particular, go ahead. Yeah, go ahead.
No, just to follow up on the question of my neighbor on the self-assessment. Is this a one-off assessment, or is it to be a yearly or 4-yearly assessment? And do we have more information on who's going to do that assessment? Thank you.
Yeah. For the time being, it is seen as a one-off to make sure that certification is established for all agencies. And it will be part of an exercise that goes beyond AML-CFT, but includes all the minimum fiduciary standards. Once, by your decision in December, they get upgraded, right? So it is comparable in that sense to certification, prior certification approaches in which agencies were examined for compliance with minimum standards. Of course, if the minimum standards evolve over time and there's a need to secure that that self-certification is re-established, that could be created again. Yeah. So.
Okay, thank you so much. So now let us kind of close this Q&A session, and let's wait for additional information from the IDB, and we will maybe put a closure at that point. So with that, we would like to move on to the next agenda item. Actually, now I'm hand over to Carola.
Thank you very much, Naoko. And now we start with the first item that we had planned for this afternoon, which is the relations with conventions and other international institutions, where we have a program for you to develop this afternoon. We will address this item together with item 15, which is the approval of the Memorandum of Understanding between the Conference of the Parties to the Minamata Convention on Mercury and the Council of the Global Environment Facility. So we will address agenda item 14 and 15 as a pair today, since they are related. And I'd now like to invite the representatives of the conventions to join us. Yeah, to start with Ms. Rosanna Silva Repetto, the Executive Secretary of the Convention on Mercury, the Minamata Convention, to join us here at the table. and to give us her presentation. Together with Mr. Rolf Payet, the Executive Secretary of the Basel, Rotterdam and Stockholm Conventions, and of course Mr. Ibrahim Chow, the Executive Director of the United Nations Convention to Combat Desertification. Please, all three of you, be so kind as to join us here at the table. And I see that we have the presentation on the Basel, Rotterdam and Stockholm Conventions ready at the screen. I don't know if you then also want to go first, please, with your presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Madam Co-Chair, and thank you, CEO, for giving us once again the opportunity for being able to present to you this afternoon a brief overview of what we have been working on our three conventions. As you know, I'm responsible for Secretariat of the Basel, Rotterdam and Stockholm Conventions, and indeed the financial mechanism for the Stockholm Convention is the GEF, and I will try to restrict my presentation to the Stockholm Convention, although there would be some elements of interest with regards, especially with the Basel Convention, which adopted, as you know, amendments to its annex, which relates to the issue of plastic wastes. So the highlights is just about a month ago we had our three COPs together in over 2 weeks in Geneva, and we had approximately 1,700, I think, delegates, one of our largest COPs ever, with about representations from 180 countries, and of course from observers as well as NGOs being present. The COPs adopted 29 decisions under the Basel Convention, 17 decisions under the Rotterdam Convention, and 27 decisions under the Stockholm Convention, and you can get access to all these documents on the website here, and I'm sure this presentation will also be made available to you for further access to the information that we have presented this afternoon. So in terms of main outcomes with regards to the Stockholm Convention, and this is important because it serves as important guidance to the GEF in its work, especially with regards to implementation of the decisions of the Stockholm Conference of the Parties. So it will welcome the inclusion in the programmatic direction of the GEF 7 of measures on marine plastics and microplastics. It also allocation for the Stockholm Convention in the GEF 8 encouraged that to be significantly increased, noting that the demands and the priorities identified by parties to address persistent organic pollutants is still very much so, especially with regards to legacy POPs, but also a new range of chemicals currently being considered and being listed by the Conference of the Parties. The third point that they also raised was that GEF to ensure that its policies and procedures related to the consideration and review of funding proposals be duly followed in an efficient and transparent manner. Again, these are issues being raised by the parties to the Stockholm Convention. And the 2017 COP guidance on GEF 7 priorities remain valid under the current circumstances as well. So in terms of the financial mechanism discussions, the COP, Stockholm COP adopted the terms of reference for the 5th review of the financial mechanism, and also adopted terms of reference for the assessment of the funding needs for the implementation of the convention over the period 2022 to 2026. I know it looks very far away, but it's just around the corner. And I think we need to start reflecting on those priorities as well, including, as you know, validation missions, as well as ability of funding for this to happen. In terms of listing of POPs, the COPs agreed for the listing of 2 POPs. In fact, dicophol was accepted to be listed under Annex A without any specific exemptions, and perfluorooctanoic acid, PFOA in its salts, and PFOA-related compounds was agreed for listing under Annex A with specific exemptions. And I just wanted to point out for those of you who not in the chemical area. This group of, it's not only one chemical, it's about 4,000 plus chemicals, which is been listed here, because the COP is also looking at groups of or families of chemicals, and there's many variants of this chemical before us. So just to put this into context, that it is not technically correct to just say 2 chemicals, but actually thousands of chemicals were listed under the Stockholm Convention at this COP. There was also amendment of the acceptable purposes and specific exemptions for PFOS in Annex B to the Convention. In terms of legacy POP, which I had mentioned before, and that is in the likes of DDT and PCB in particular, concluded countries that rely on indoor residual spraying for disease vector control may need DDT for that purpose, but there was also very strong views from parties, especially those from African countries, that we should look at an end on life for DDT. I know it's a very controversial issue, but many African countries raised that as we need to step our efforts to really significantly phase out DDT, although there is, of course, measured results in the environment that the levels of DDT has indeed gone down. Parties to set up the efforts by urgently implementing actions to eliminate the use of PCBs in equipment by 2025 and ensure ASM of waste containing or contaminated with PCBs by 2028. And I just wanted to also highlight here that in our efforts in discussions with the World Bank, for example, in the new safeguards, they have already incorporated some of the elements of chemicals and waste management, especially in the World Bank infrastructure projects, to ensure that we also not only rely on GEF grant financing for addressing some of these, but also when new investment projects are also implemented, that they are also, in a sense, made chemical and waste proof, if you get what I mean, in terms of what the Stockholm Convention is deciding on. The COPs also decided to reestablish a small intersessional working group on PCBs and to review progress in eliminating PCBs at the next COP in 2021. In terms of the regional centers, which you know are very, very important for implementation at the national and regional levels, the COP endorsed for another 4 years all Stockholm Convention regional centers, and the results on the performance of the regional centers was also considered by the COP. The COP also considered the proposal for a new regional center in Novosibirsk Institute of Organic Chemistry, located in Novosibirsk in the Russian Federation, has a new Stockholm regional center for that region. And as mentioned before, I just wanted to provide you with some insight in what happened under the Basel Convention, especially in the area of plastic waste. As you know, the Basel Convention also deals with Stockholm waste as well as Minamata waste. So I think it is pertinent that I also share with you some of the outcomes of this. And I just wanted to point out as well that some of the plastic waste also contains POPs, and has a consequence. If you mix the POPs containing waste, plastic waste, with other plastic waste which don't have POPs in there, you end up with POPs containing plastic waste. So it is very important that as we move on the next few years of discussions with parties and companies and NGOs, that we look at how we can avoid or minimize and reduce the introduction or the propagation of POPs in plastic and plastic waste. And otherwise we'll be discussing also here in the context of Stockholm this issue. So in terms of Basel Convention, there was the amendment of Annex 2, Annex 8 and Annex 9 by adding entries related to plastic waste. This was a proposal submitted by Norway over a year ago, and then supported by a number of countries earlier this year. There was also decisions made to update the technical guidelines for the identification and the environmentally sound management of plastic waste, and for the disposal. There's quite a number of decisions that have been taken in relation to this issue, which can be found on which can be shared. It's not yet finalized because it has to go for translation and editing, but it can be made available for those council members that would like to have a copy of those decisions as soon as they are published. And of course, they will be updated on our website. And the COP also established a partnership on plastic waste with a very specific terms of reference to create a platform to engage not only governments, but the private sector and NGOs in addressing the issue of plastic waste from both an upstream and also a downstream perspective. In terms of guidelines and manuals, as I mentioned before, this is a very strong relationship to the Stockholm Convention and indeed the Minamata Convention as well when it comes to POPs and Minamata wastes. So practical manuals on extended producer responsibility and financing systems for ESM was considered. 5 technical guidelines on POPs waste was also adopted. And there was revised interim technical guidelines on the transboundary movements of electrical and electronic waste and use electrical and electronic equipment that was adopted. In terms of other partnerships under the Basel Convention, parties agreed on a follow-up partnership to PACE. The parties recommended a proposal submitted by the regional centers for this work to move more concretely now at the regional and national levels as the issue is still persisting. We will be looking at how to accelerate this implementation at the regional level during this inter-COP period. The COP also adopted the Household Waste Partnership Work Plan for the biennium 2020 and 2021, and as recommended by the COP, this partnership will also work very closely with the Plastic Waste Partnership. Quickly, in terms of the Rotterdam Convention, the Rotterdam Convention listed the following chemicals in Annex 3 and made them subject to the pre-informed consent procedure, and that was hexabromocyclododecane, which is an industrial chemical, and phorate, which is a pesticide. And I just wanted to reiterate again, the Rotterdam Convention does not ban the chemicals. It allows the exchange of chemicals under a pre-informed consent procedure. It also adopted under Annex 7 procedures and mechanisms of compliance under the Rotterdam Convention. I think I've reached the last slide, and this is to do with joint issues, which of course are linked also with the implementation of the Stockholm Convention. And the parties adopted a technical assistance plan for the period 2018 to 2021, and also called for synergies in combating illegal traffic and trade, especially encouraging parties to establish national coordinating mechanisms to facilitate information exchange among relevant authorities, as well as encouraging the IOMC, regional centers, Interpol, WCO, the Secretariat of the Montreal Protocol, and regional enforcement networks to undertake activities aimed at assisting parties to BRS conventions regarding combating illegal traffic and trade. Thank you very much. And as mentioned before, all the details are on the website, and I'm available to answer any questions and, of course, provide any clarification on any of the outcomes of the COPs. Thank you, Madam.
Thank you so much, Rolf. I think we will take questions after all 3 presentations. So I'd now like to give the floor to Rosanna to present progress in the framework of the Minamata Convention.
Thank you. CEO and Chairperson of the Global Environment Facility, Council, Co-Chair, Council members, distinguished delegates. I would first like to thank the Council for the invitation to this meeting and the opportunity to address you in relation to the Minamata Convention on Mercury. It is again a great pleasure for the Minamata Secretariat to be here with you in a meeting of the GEF Council. We last met in December 2018, immediately after the second meeting of the Conference of the Parties to the Minamata Convention had taken place in November in Geneva. I am pleased now to be here again when the convention has 109 parties, with Tuvalu having become a party this week. And now that the Secretariat is undertaking the work mandated by COP2 in preparation for COP3, which will be held again in November in Geneva this year. The GEF has been a partner since the negotiations of the convention, which entered into force less than 2 years ago, only in August 2017, and has accompanied the convention's parties in COPs 1 and 2. The GEF, as part of the convention's financial mechanism fulfills a critical role in supporting the implementation of the Convention. We are grateful for this, as we are grateful to the GEF Secretariat for its invaluable support and cooperation. There is a very good pace in the ratifications and accessions to the Convention in all regions, and I would also like to recognize the role of the GEF in this regard. The support of the GEF, which started with projects already under GEF 5, continued under GEF 6, to cover enabling activities in almost all eligible countries. Through various other projects, the GEF has also contributed positively to reduction of mercury use, emissions, and releases to protect human health and the environment, which is our ultimate goal. $141 million were allocated to the implementation of the Minamata Convention under GEF 6, with a total of 110 countries developing their Minamata Convention initial assessments, and 32 countries being able to prepare their national action plans on artisanal and small-scale gold mining. 15% of the total GEF 7 resources is to be allocated to the chemicals and waste focal area. The Secretariat and the parties to the Convention sincerely appreciate this significant support, which will hopefully lead to universal ratification of the Minamata Convention and a high rate in its implementation. Impact at scale is expected to be achieved through the modality of global cross-cutting programs, like the GOLD program, which is the Global Opportunities for the Long-Term Development of the Artisanal and Small-Scale Gold Mining sector, and the SEEDS program, which you just approved yesterday, which is the acronym is for Implementing Sustainable, Low, and Non-Chemical Development in Seeds. These programs are to be singled out as they tackle many aspects of sustainable development, highlighting the fact that the Minamata Convention is not only merely a chemicals convention, but rather a sustainable development convention. Global programs have unique features, and I would like to mention some of them in order to emphasize the importance of these global programs. They are, in effect, unique in their geographical and thematic scope. They cover a number of child projects in multiple countries across regions. They present the advantage of leveraging more resources than single countries or regions and attracting the private sector investments, which are more sustainable at a scale not achievable by single countries or even regions, as well as promoting exchange of knowledge and experience across regions, which would not be possible with only regional interventions, for example. Also, the information and knowledge gathered at the national level is shared among regions to achieve impacts at global level. Working at the global level ensures as well that when legislation and standards are introduced through projects, no gaps are created in the regions and countries, which would not be covered in a traditional approach. Global programs are multi-agency. The combined comparative experience brought by the different GEF implementing agencies, coupled with the involvement and contributions made by key regional partners, ensure that the barriers are identified and are addressed through interventions sourced from a broad range of experience and expertise. Another innovative aspect of global programs is their focus on developing robust public-private partnerships, combined with national-level sustainable financial mechanisms. This approach is further bolstered by close collaboration with other donors, donor-funded chemicals and waste activities in each of the covered regions. So we are very, very glad for this new approach, and we look forward to more innovative approaches to support the implementation of the Minamata Convention. Allow me now to update you on the agenda item of the upcoming COP3 of the Minamata Convention that directly relates to the GEF. This is the review of the financial mechanism of the Convention. Article 13 of the Convention defines a mechanism for the provision of adequate, predictable, and timely financial resources, which includes the GEF and a specific international program to support capacity building and technical assistance. The Conference of the Parties provided guidance to the GEF at its first meeting through Decision 1.5, and provided as well guidance on the operation of the specific international program through its Decision 1.16. COP2 last year agreed to request the Secretariat to compile the information to be provided by the GEF, the specific international program, parties, and other sources, which was identified in Article 13 of the Convention as being necessary for the review of the financial mechanism, and to present a synthesis of such information for consideration by the COP at its third meeting. Paragraph 11 of Article 13 of the Convention states that the review should examine the level of funding, the guidance provided by the conference to the entities entrusted to make the financial mechanism operational, and its overall effectiveness. The GEF has already provided to the Minamata Secretariat last month information relating to the review of the financial mechanism. The governing board of the specific international program, in its meeting last February in Geneva, also agreed on its input to the review process. So now the Secretariat is preparing the relevant document for COP3 as requested by the COP. As referred to last December in the 55th meeting of the Council here, COP2 adopted the MOU between the GEF Council and the Minamata COP. The President of the Convention transmitted to the Council the MOU adopted by the COP with a letter dated 12th December 2018. The MOU is before you at this meeting for your approval. I look forward to continuing to work with the GEF and the GEF entities on more innovative ways to address the issues of our concern. Allow me now to close my remarks by emphasizing my conviction that with the support of the GEF, in the successful implementation of the Convention, we will together be able to protect human health and the environment from the negative effects of mercury, and over time to make mercury history. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Rosanna. Now I'm particularly happy to give the floor to Ibrahim, Executive Director of the United Nations Convention to Combat Desertification.
Thank you very much, Co-Chair, Excellency, CEO, Co-Chair, Council members. I would like in particular to recognize a Council member from China, because China has the presidency of the COP of the UNCCD, and also would like to recognize the presence of the representative from India, because India will be the host of the next conference of the parties in September of this year. Ladies and gentlemen, during this council, there is a lot to focus on the big issue and budgets, rightly so. There's a lot at stake. But I would like to take a step back for a moment and give those discussions some context by introducing you to some people who you will never meet, but who are connected to every person in this room. Tan, who produces tea in Vietnam. One, who farms fruit and meat in Cuba. And Edmond, who grows tea in Albania. Thanks to GEF, they are restoring areas of degraded land and delivering wider benefits for biodiversity and climate change. Take Tan, where chemicals and climate change had reduced her land to bare stones and her tea bushes to red stumps. Now she is restoring her soil, doubling her yield, and teaching organic farming methods to other growers in the area. Where One was among thousands of Cubans allocated unhealthy, abandoned monoculture land, now his family runs a thriving silvopastoral operation which supplies food to their community and farming knowledge to their neighbors. And where Edmond fought unsuccessfully to grow a much-needed species of tree in an area hit by erosion, flooding, and illegal logging, Now he's introducing solutions learned from his Austrian counterparts. Quite simply, because of the way GEF has touched the lives of these few individuals, they in turn are improving the prospects of many more people and places around the world. These brief stories are typical of an integrated approach to land management that can only be applauded and encouraged. There is no doubt that with the conventions on desertification, biodiversity, and climate, the GEF already gets a 3-for-1 return on investment. Between 2010 and 2017, 42% of the 618 projects supporting the UNCCD are classified solely as land degradation projects. The rest, 58%, are multifocal area projects delivering for all the conventions. An analysis of the results from the GEF5 land degradation projects confirms that investing in sustainable land management in production landscapes is a cost-effective way to deliver real global environmental benefits while creating local and national socio-economic benefits too. There is also no doubt the impact programs on food systems, cities, and forest management are focusing on the drivers of degradation and the partners who can make every dollar work harder to ramp up results and transformation instead of spreading resources too thinly to make a real difference. Again, that is a 3-for-1 integrated approach which could help turn a cycle of destruction into one of growth. To my colleagues in charge of the chemicals conventions and sustainable development conventions, I take the point on the podium with me today. I see as many links between their work and land. Mining activities often degrade lands, and most of the chemicals they are dealing with pollute ecosystems, lakes, river systems, food, and affect people's health. So protecting the environment and protecting people against harmful effects of chemicals. Furthermore, as we see more frequent and more severe droughts affecting all countries, rich and poor, we should ask ourselves, what solutions should we devise to assist the most vulnerable? For those rural communities who have no insurance cover, whose sole source of revenue comes from the natural capital, and whose countries are too poor to prepare meaningful responses to emergencies, every cycle of drought is hell. So is every cyclone, every forest fire. Science has warned us. With climate change, we are likely to have more frequent and more severe extreme events. The question is whether we are building sufficiently strong and resilient systems to face them. For example, today, more and more people are moving to cities that use an area 200 times their size to meet demands for resources, put more pressure on those already hit by land degradation and water scarcity, and ultimately force more rural communities to refuel that cycle. But the combined effect of those impact programs can help restore 2 billion hectares of land around the world to meet that growing demand from urban areas while stabilizing vulnerable rural areas and sinking huge amounts of carbon dioxide. What would be a massive step forward achieving land degradation neutrality by 2030? And while the recent IPBES report rang some welcome alarm bells on the threats to our biodiversity, the upcoming IPCC land report will bring a balanced perspective that reinforces the mutually beneficial links between all three conventions. That creates a window for us to rapidly share the lessons being learned from the way GEF identifies and target projects that maximizes those natural synergies, and find more sweet spots where we can accelerate and multiply such cost-effective benefits across all the sustainable development goals. There are two perfect occasions to make that happen. With the UNCCD COP14 in early September in New Delhi, focusing on jobs and opportunities. Then the Climate Action Summit, looking for practical solutions to speed up and scale up efforts across the public and private sector. And as we mark the UNCCD's 25th anniversary this year, the 197 parties to the convention are determined to make the most of both of them. Ladies and gentlemen, let me once again thank the GEF for betting on land as the ultimate natural solution to some of our biggest challenges, and promise that UNCCD will do everything possible to prove you were right to do so. George Washington said that perseverance and spirit have done wonders in all ages. Well, I think people like Tan, One, and Edmond have already worked wonders. Now it's our turn to do the same. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ibrahim. This completes the 3 presentations. I'd like to now pass the floor to Naoko to make her remarks. Thank you.
Actually, this is also the opportunity to present our paper, right? Okay, I just would like to make sure that the collaboration between the Secretariat and those 3 executive secretaries have been really, really strong. And then, as I mentioned yesterday in my opening, we really have a historic moment to really capture that political attention and to really concretize this multi-stakeholder partnership. And all of you mentioned that how high the stake is and how the collaboration is important. And we were all determined to really work together to realize the maximum impact on the ground. And I would like to actually open also the maybe the floor. And I would just wonder if we need to present the paper or we could just receive the question. Okay, so I will just send this back to you, Carola.
Then I'd like to give the floor to our council members to make any comments they may have or ask questions to the 3 presenters. Please. Jos, please, the floor is yours.
Thanks. Good afternoon, colleagues, and thanks to the 3 presenters, all executive secretaries, for their interesting presentation. I think I will just follow the document because that's how I have structured my notes, and then you appear whenever you appear in the document, right? I hope you don't mind. Well, let me start by saying that I know a protocol is important, but we have 2 more conventions that we have attended, and not the smallest ones. And it would be good to hear. I mean, I'm not insisting to have it now because they probably don't come prepared, but to hear about that also because, I mean, you know, biodiversity is in the intersessional period, if you want, but climate change is ongoing, and we know that, and we know how important that is. And it would be good to have an update on what's happening there. But I will take care of part of that. Then, but I mean, I've said this before. There are 5 conventions, and we have to treat them all in the same way. So let me start with well, CBD is the first one here, and as I said, well, after the COP last year, we're happy to see that now the GEF has provided the response to the guidance in Annex 1. That's fine. I think there's not much to add to that. It's well, standard practice. This will be communicated to the next COP, which is in China, by the way, also next year. I think the response is fine, and so I can go to UNFCCC, which as we know. I mean, there are very interesting developments that I've seen. I come later back to that it's climate change, but when we come to the relationship with the GCF, which I think we're on a very good track. I have a concern with regard to UNFCCC, and I mean, it will come up next week, and it is with regard to the technical and financial support for reporting. So that is not national communications and biannual update reports. Now I know, and we've seen this for a couple of years even, that with regard to the BURs, the GEF has actually disbursed a lot of, well, all requests, and the turnout of the reports is deceivingly low. Now, I mean, I'm not, that's a fact, and we will discuss this next week. But in going through your report, I saw that with regard to national communications, it even looks worse. If you see from the third national communication on, the fourth one, 5, the fifth one, 1, the sixth national communication, 1, for a universally, I think it's a universally ratified convention. So my question, my specific question is, has the GEF already paid for all this? Is this the same situation of the BURs? Or is it a reflection of the parties not asking for support? I hope it's the second one, because if the first one, we have as donors to this institution, I think we have a serious problem. So that's with regards to UNFCCC, the main point. So I'm doing my best to be brief. You know, I love this item. I can go on forever, but then I know some will fall asleep. Well, here we go. UNCCD, one of my favorites. I remember one of my very first meetings was on INCD. I think it was in Geneva, and it was in '96 or so. And I've seen all your predecessors. Welcome to the family, Mr. Tiao, and congratulations with your election. Of course, I've heard very interesting points you made, and the good examples of what is going on in the field. That's of course very encouraging. I can't refrain from saying that I hear mostly land degradation. I hear very little about desertification. I know there is a trend. I've been personally on the barricades against it, because I stick to the convention definitions and purpose and objective. You also mentioned drought, which is also and basically undertreated by the parties. It's, I think, a more delicate problem than desertification, but because of the sort of randomness, I guess. But I wish you all the best. First of all, with the COP, which is well a couple of months away, and with further supporting the parties, implementing the convention, of course, with the help of GEF as a financial mechanism, as we used to say. There is one point that struck me in the report, is with regard to the CRIC. So the CRIC is the Committee for the Review of Implementation of the Convention, so sort of an SBI. The CRIC 17 outcome, which took place earlier this year. The point that struck me was that if you look in the document at paragraph 49, it's then 1, 2, 3, the fourth sub. So these are conclusions from that meeting, but they will feed into the COP, and they will feed in mainly to the aspect of guidance. Well, it's not guidance; it's called collaboration with the GEF, because it's not straightforward guidance. And it is a request to the global mechanism to strengthen its links with the GEF for facilitating, one, the process of countries accessing GEF 7 resources, fine, for UNCCD implementation, and two, so I repeat, global mechanism to facilitate the allocation of resources related to the enabling activities under the GEF to support countries' obligations to the Convention. Something's wrong. The GM has nothing to do with that. I hope we agree, and I hope you can take care of that in the COP. The global mechanism is what it is. It's not a financial mechanism. It's a global mechanism, and it has no say in the work of the GEF, let alone with respect to allocating money, allocating resources for enabling activities. So I don't know how this got in there, but it's wrong. So please. Okay. POPs. Yeah, that was an interesting meeting, wasn't it? And thank you for reminding us that. I mean, I didn't even realize that we say we added 2 POPs and now it turns out to be 1,000. Because it comes in all forms and sizes and so. Again, you will remember my big fight to increase resources for the POPs Convention in the replenishment process, which turned out to be zip. It's a minus 16 million. Still very angry about that. And here you go. 8 months later, we got 1,000 more POPs. And we got this legacy POPs, and we're trying and we're realizing that countries are not getting there with the PCBs, right? 2025. So we have now set up a committee to evaluate that. That's well done, but what are we going to do with 16 million less? So very sorry to see that. So of course, you will see once you get, that will be for the next meeting, you will respond to the guidance. I know already what you're going to respond, because there's now a paragraph that says encourages the donors to the GEF to significantly increase the allocation for the POPs Convention in GEF 8. Now, I've been around for a while. This is very strong language. We've never had that. We would always oppose this kind of strong, significant increase. One thing, because, I mean, the GEF has to deal with all, as I said, but in this case, we asked for it. So that's what we got. And another issue that you will respond, the way you have responded to it under the CBD, is the issue of access to GEF funding. It pops up everywhere. There's again a paragraph in the COPs, the Stockholm COPs decision. It's reiterating its request because nothing has happened. We know what the issue is. We can't do much about it, but it is there. And I'm just looking around the table to see if somebody can help us out on this one, because, and I know it's not easy, because next week we have it again. Next week we have it again, when we talk NATCOMs and BURs. So it's a very unfortunate situation, and I think those were the comments for POPs. Minamata, with the MOU, I think it's not a problem for the Council to approve the MOU. I would say there was much more discussion at the COP. It is a very interesting MOU because I've seen a couple of things that I don't remember from other MOUs, and the Minamata Convention is very interesting also because, well, you have the first COP and you have the initial guidance, eligibility, and so to the GEF. Then you have COP 2. And you have normally additional guidance, but Minamata, no. Minamata said, the conference, the party said, fine, what we have said last time, okay. Now that is encouraging. Because I don't have to recall you the, what is it, 220 pages of guidance from the Climate Change Convention that we have up to now, if not more. Because I was looking at our annex here, it's another avalanche of guidance and basically repeating itself. Now, in the MOU of Minamata, it actually says, well, first of all, in Article 3, or Paragraph 3, that the COP will review the guidance and decide to update or revise it. But what I don't remember from other MOUs is that the GEF can also ask to revise it. And that's Paragraph 5. If the Conference of the Party provides guidance to the GEF subsequent to its first meeting, the Council may consult with the COP to update and clarify existing guidance in light of new or additional guidance as it receives. I think we have to keep this one in mind because we think you're on the right track with the frequency of guidance. And next, this year, COP3, right, is the review. We will see what comes out of that, but keep this in mind, and if it's not absolutely necessary and the initial guidance is set not only about eligibility but also program priorities, which is I think the most important one in the successive COPs also. If we can keep it to that, that would be helpful. Finally, within this is a bit out of the conventions. We, of course, agree and welcome the involvement of the GEF in the special program on chemicals, where you're sitting as an expert observer. Very important because to avoid overlaps or duplications with that and POPs and Minamata and so on. So that's a good. That's for institutional strengthening, the special program for institutional strengthening, which is a UNEA voluntary fund. I think one but last point, GEF and GCF. I think is very encouraging what we see here, and that is in one point I didn't put the page number by, but you can find it back. The joint programming, or the pilot, which was in Laos. What is it, PDR? And the first national dialogue not national dialogue on GEF issues, but GEF and GCF, and looking forward, we're looking to possibilities to jointly plan, program, and hopefully implement, with the direct result already in the form of an LDCF project that we're going to discuss tomorrow. So that somehow complements. So that sounds very promising for complementarity, avoiding overlaps and increasing impact. So I hope that this is not a one-off Lao thing, and I'll try to make some publicity for that in the climate context. Finally, to all of you and those not present on the podium, I think Mr. Tiao said it, that when you were talking about synergy and more impact through the Rio, we were also looking to the chemicals, right? And you said, you guys come in agriculture, health, and so on. Since we have firmly stepped into the impact program phase since yesterday, I would say, I think we should pick up again the dialogue between executive secretaries and with the council that we have had a couple of times in the council, in the margin of the council. But I think that now more than ever, it's the right time to refresh that and take things forward. Thank you, and sorry for being long, but this is my last intervention, I think. So.
Thank you, Jos, and a very beautiful one. Thank you very much. Next speakers are first Maritain and then Cordula.
Thank you, Co-Chair. And thank you to all the three conventions for very interesting reports. we can support the proposed decision and approve the Minamata MOU. And I also want to take this opportunity to thank the Secretariat for the efforts to strengthen cooperation with other multilateral climate funds. I know you're working on trying to strengthen coordination and cooperation and identify possible joint programming in some areas, especially with the GCF. We would like to see more of this kind of work. We noticed that you had a joint trip to Laos, I think, this year. I think that's those are the things that are exciting. If we can work more on that path. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Marita. And I noted that both Jos and you already responded to the documents also presented for these agenda items. So I please invite others also to respond to these documents, since they do not require a further introduction from the side of the Secretariat. Thank you. Now over to Cordula and then to civil society.
I have one point on the agenda. I would like to ask the co-chairs also to invite the presidency of the 5th meeting of the International Conference on Chemicals Management at some moment in this under this topic to speak. And well, I have some points. I will make them directly as well. Well, we welcome the GEF's effort to create synergies between the various conventions, for which it operates as a financing mechanism, and we encourage the GEF Secretariat to continue collaboration with the different conventions. We can also support the decisions and the Minamata MOU. We, like Marita, we also believe that the cooperation of the GEF with other international institutions, such as the Adaptation Fund, the Green Climate Fund, or the UN Forum on Forestry, are extremely important, seen its mandate, and we therefore highly encourage the Secretariat to further develop this cooperation. We particularly encourage you to exchange with other organizations on questions of policies. I think we have heard examples today, like the grievance mechanisms, where I think one can learn a lot from each other, and we should build on what is there. And on the other hand, the GEF can maybe help newer institutions to build up their own systems. And what we would appreciate is getting a bit more information of the interaction of the GEF with regard to assisting countries in implementing the NDCs and its collaboration with the NDC partnership, with a view to UNFCCC as well. Okay, we would also welcome the expansion of the cooperation with the Montreal Protocol and the Samoa Pathways process.
Thank you, Cordula. I now give the floor to civil society and then to Renato.
Thank you, Co-Chair. The GEF CSO network warmly welcomes and appreciates the comprehensive compilation of updates of activities of the GEF in the support of all the conventions and information on the relations between the GEF Secretariat and other international conventions and institutions. The documents demonstrate that GEF is addressing convention priorities, respecting and addressing guidance from COPs of conventions. It serves as a financial partners, entity, and in debt facilitating synergy. We need more visibility for CSO network in convention related in relation in the convention in consultation in country and regional level. GEF CSOs network should take part in convention related events like COP by selecting NGOs working in the conventions within the GCN framework. As mechanism of GEF CSOs should be involved in decision making of the National Steering Committee in order to implement GEF-supported programs related to the conventions. while developing projects related to conventions, implementing agencies of GEF must ensure involvement of grassroots CSOs in the project development and implementation of the activities. To improve performance and results, CSOs should be involved in capacity building activities for the related convention, implementation mechanism, coordination teams of focal points for the conventions at the country level should involve GEF CSOs, national representative, and other CSOs operating in the country, having the expertise and field experience, and to make sure that the implementation of the convention meet people and country needs. CSOs needs to be included in capacity building activities for the transparency issues at country level. Encourage involvement of balanced gender groups, bringing them more seriously into the implementation of the conventions. GEF should provide capacity building and trainer to the country level so that local people had access to the best available techniques on best environmental practices. GEF Secretariat should make a link between the government and researchers to facilitate scaling up of innovation and successful pilot projects related to POPs and plastic production, using and recycling. Transparency of the development, the national report for the conventions should be improved with early involvement of CSOs, as well as reflecting the accepted comments of the stakeholders. The GEF support recipient countries must ensure involvement of critical parties, including CSOs, to enhance the progress toward Aichi biodiversity targets and capacity building, support for Nagoya and Cartagena protocols under Decision 1423. GEF's response to the convention party should be inclusive and reflective of country specific conditions supported by evidence-based information. Thank you for your kind attention.
Thank you for your contribution. Now over to Renato from Brazil, and then Greg.
Thank you, Madam Co-Chair. On behalf of our constituency of Brazil, Colombia, and Ecuador, I would like to thank the three presentations. I think it was a good to hear from them, and we would just like to stick to the document that was presented. We have just three minor comments on perhaps oversights that we identified on the documents. In paragraph 32 of the documents, the date of the COP24 of UNFCCC, it's wrong. It happened from 2 to 15 December 2018. So it's as it is stated in paragraph 22. In the end of the paragraph 33 on finance, there was consideration. The consideration debated under this topic was not only over ex ante finance, but also ex post finance. And they have discussed not the target itself, but the process to achieve the targets. So for this, we would like to suggest the following language. On finance, parties agreed on the information elements to be communicated on ex ante climate finance, the categories of information to be reported for ex post finance, and to start deliberation on the new collective quantified goal. And finally, on paragraph 49 on that it talks about the Desertification Convention, I would like to just make a slight minor correction here. That starts, the CRIC adopted 3 draft documents containing not conclusions, but views of the parties on conclusions. And continues with and recommendations from the meeting to be forward to not to the conclusions, but to the CRIC 18 for discussion, and then to the COP 14 to be held on September 19, and of which the following are of relevance for the GEF. So those are the three minor corrections we would like to make. Thank you.
Thank you, Renato. Next speaker is Greg, and after that, Jan Petter.
Thank you very much, Madam Co-Chair. Well, first I'd like to say thanks to the heads of the multilateral environmental agreements who are here. That was very interesting to hear your presentations. And on this agenda item, it's always a good reminder that the core function of the GEF is to support environmental work, globally environmental benefits, to assist developing countries to meet their legally binding obligations under these conventions. So this is a very important item. I'd like to echo Jose, who mentioned that it would be very helpful if we could organize these sessions so that any representative from one of the conventions or the instruments could have an opportunity to speak. I understand there's procedural elements to this, but I think it would be helpful to us all. And I would support Germany's call to hear from the SAICM presidency at this meeting to understand what's taking place in that initiative. Well, a number of items. First of all, on the GEF 7 replenishment, it's been interesting. It's been a year now since the replenishment has been finished, and we're well into a good start on GEF 7. So some of us go to the conventions, and it's been interesting to see how the different parties greet the outcome of the replenishment period. And of course, the total allocation from GEF 7 is lower than GEF 6. There's been different allocations between the focal areas. We have new impact programs. So they have different implications. I think the overall impression that we have is that by and large parties accepted the programming decisions and funding allocations, sometimes after a pretty good discussion. But I think it's a sign that in general, the GEF, well, the donors to the GEF through the replenishment process and the recipients and others who participated in that process got it right. Not to every point of, perhaps we all have differences of opinion, and I'll get into one particular convention I think will have a different understanding of what should come in the next replenishment period, but I'll come to that in a minute. Covering some of the focal areas under the climate change, during replenishment negotiations, Canada had favored lower level of cuts to the climate change allocation. However, we appreciate that despite there's less funding as compared to GEF 6, we do expect to have greater GHG emission reductions in the GEF through more effective use of in the activities and through the impact programs. So we appreciate that as part of the GEF playing its competitive advantage role, it is working cooperatively with the GCF, and we appreciate those efforts. Secondly, in terms of following and making sure that we do make progress despite the lower levels of funding, it'll be very important for the Secretariat to monitor and report on the progress towards the GHG emission reduction targets throughout GEF 7 at these council meetings to ensure that the projected results are in fact being realized. Canada is an active supporter and contributor to the Capacity Building Initiative for Transparency, the CBIT, and we look forward to continued GEF work and progress on that initiative. And likewise, with respect to technical assistance and the Climate Technology Center and Network, we look forward to seeing continued improvement of GEF reporting as requested by parties at the last UNFC Triple COP. On chemicals and wastes, thank you to Rolf and Roxana for your presentations. I'd like to start with talking about a convention that actually was not covered by the GEF, the Basel Convention. While it doesn't have a financial mechanism, there were some very important decisions that Rolf mentioned in the recent triple COPs with respect to plastics, which of course GEF is very involved with. Basel parties agreed to amendments to strengthen controls of the transboundary movement of plastic waste, in particular by reducing exports of non-recyclable plastic waste to countries that are not in a position to manage them properly. Parties also agreed to establish a partnership on plastic waste and supported a set of actions and guidance on environmentally sound management of plastic waste. And the Stockholm Convention also welcomed the GEF 7 inclusion of marine plastic litter in GEF 7 program. So we encourage GEF to continue to play an active role in this very dynamic and evolving issue. both in the international waters focal area and the chemicals and waste focal area. We have to be mindful, of course, that with plastics being addressed on many fronts and with many players and new initiatives, and that was certainly demonstrated in the active discussions we had in the CSO session on Monday, it's going to be important that GEF continues to work closely with others and plays an added value role, but doesn't duplicate efforts. And that's going to be a challenge because there's many, many players who want in, and GEF has a certain role, and we must respect what GEF can do and what perhaps is best left to others. With respect to Stockholm, as the Executive Secretary mentioned, there continues to be listing of additional chemicals for elimination restriction, and this is an excellent progress in terms of the health and benefits for the international community. Since 2005, when the Stockholm entered into force, the number of chemicals covered by the convention has more than doubled from its original dirty dozen. However, despite the additional number of chemicals, the GEF allocation was flat in GEF 6 and actually decreased in GEF 7. So that's, I think, the reason that there was no dispute at the recent Stockholm COP that to a decision that strongly supports encouraging GEF donors at the next, that is the GEF 8 negotiations, to increase significantly the allocation to the Stockholm Convention. In fact, some of us had to tamp down some of the language to keep it diplomatic because there really is a strong feeling that that convention deserves more funding because there's more things to do, more chemicals to control. With respect to the Minamata Convention, apologies, there's a few technical corrections that in the document that we'll provide in writing to the Secretariat, but so that for transparency, just to let people know, in paragraph 12, the number of ratifications is now 108, so that more than half the countries, after only a couple of years, have ratified this very important convention. That's very encouraging. And in paragraph 36, it's very critical to amend the text to include an additional phrase. The text reads, quote, elimination of the use of mercury and POPs in products, and then as specified in Annex A, it should be Part 1 of Annex A of the Minamata Convention, because Part 1 refers to products that are subject to phase out, while Part 2 talks to phasing down of dental amalgam. So these are technical matters, and I can follow up with the Secretariat afterwards in terms of making those changes. The MOU convention, or the Minamata Convention, it's not an MOU convention, though it seems that it sometimes, for those of us who followed the Minamata Convention, this MOU, the Memorandum of Understanding, at COP2, the parties adopted the MOU between the Minamata Convention and the GEF Council. It's very administrative in matters, but it seems like a ping pong ball back and forth between the Council and the COP. We strongly support adoption of the MOU by this Council so that it can enter into effect. Another subject is post-2020 visions. This is a very exciting time for the international community because both in the biodiversity and the chemicals and waste area, we're looking at developing a vision and a set of actions in the post-2020 period. So for the Convention on Biodiversity, with the HE targets coming to an end in 2020, and the strategic approach to international chemicals management, SAICM or SAICM, having a 2020 goal. So just like we've been reviewing, we review programming directions every 4 years for the GEF Replenishment. This is an exciting time to take stock of where we are in biodiversity and chemicals and waste and set new goals and new activities. So while Canada, we're developing our own approach on these particular visions for post-2020, we certainly appreciate that resource mobilization and innovative financing will play an important role, and we certainly see a part for the GEF Secretariat to bring its experience, expertise, and its current mandate and role to the discussions so that as we achieve an ambitious post-2020 agenda, GEF has a very strong role in those efforts. Finally, I'd like to say thanks to our friend Joe Spuys of Belgium, who's going off to a better place, which is called retirement. And we're going to miss him here, I think, around the Council, and certainly we will in the conventions. His wisdom will be missed, and his strong support for the MEAs. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Greg. Now over to Jan Petter, and after that, Ari.
Thank you, Chair. First, I'd like to thank the Secretariat for this report. Even with large impact programs, it remains essential to ensure GEF policies have strong links to policy guidance from the conventions. On CBD, we appreciate that the GEF has been engaged on the transition to the post-2020 framework and aims to continue this collaboration. Like Canada, we appreciate very much that the COP of the Minamata Convention adopted the MOU, support that we do the same. And let us note also that the GEF has played actually an important role in facilitating to make this convention operational, something we can be proud of. Relationship to the Green Climate Fund, I would just like to refer to what Joseph from Belgium said, and agree to that. Now for some specific remarks on marine litter and microplastics. And during replenishment negotiations, this issue was defined more clearly as a cross-sectoral challenge, affecting both the chemicals waste and international waters. We do see some encouraging signs of follow-up to this in the present work program, including the Islands program. But we would also like here to refer to actually support everything that Canada said on the relationship to the Stockholm Convention, and also the relevance of what's happening in the Basel Convention, even though it's not funded by GEF. We would like, actually, during the last council meeting, we encouraged the Secretariat to engage in dialogue with the Stockholm Convention on establishing policies and concrete ideas for dealing with marine litter and microplastics. And we would like to be informed by the Secretariat on any such dialogue with the Stockholm Secretariat and possible future steps. Thank you.
Thank you, Jan-Peter. Ari, you have the floor, and after that, Gillian.
Thank you. Well, I will try to be. I will start with the interventions made by MEAs. So the first BRS conventions, the COPs. It is one of the COP I missed this year, and then it seemed I missed the most important BRS COP. And it is very good to see the COP decided to encourage significantly the allocation for the POPs. And it's our constituency, on behalf of the constituency, I think it is very important. And I would like to encourage the Convention Secretariat, the Joint Convention Secretariat, to actively engage more on GEF's 8 replenishment negotiation. And also, it's also good to see PCBs to be eliminated by 2028, which is very nice to hear. And then, as Canada said, even though the Basel is not for the GEF, but it is also good to know that establishment of partnership on plastic waste, and I think it is something that GEF Secretariat maybe can look at, and then possibly we are talking about plastic and waste in last two the council meetings. And for the Minamata Convention with the MOU draft as a very good success. Congratulations. And even though the Minamata is the youngest, but it's been very active. So I think the Secretariat is doing a very good job. And for the UNCCD, it's very nice to see the Greek drafted documents, particularly requesting more resource for the LDN and its LDN targets and its lining projects and programs. And also, I would like to congratulate GEF Secretariat on the existing engagement with the GCF. And it's always good to know that half of the GEF council member belongs to the GCF, so that's why maybe it's the cooperation engagement is good. And also one point to the GEF Secretariat is we would like to see updated information on Montreal Protocol and its Kigali Amendment, because as far as I know, GEF provides fund for the Kigali Amendments and enabling activities. So in next the Council meeting, it would be good if GEF provides some updated information on that. And then the last, no, not the last, but another point is I would like to encourage all the Secretariat of the MES to engage more with the implementing partners, particularly on impact programs, because impact programs are the way to promote or improve the synergies, particularly for the recipient countries to implement the commitment obligation under the conventions, 5 conventions we are here. And then also lastly, very briefly, taking this opportunity, I would like to also ask GEF and then other MEAs and international institutes, secretariats to work more on implementation of the UN Decade of Ecological Rehabilitation, because it's something that we all aim to reach by 2030, along with the post-2020 and the Paris and whatever it is, all of those. Thank you.
Thank you, Ari. Last 2 speakers from the side of the Council are Gillian and Chaibo. Gillian, please.
Thank you. I would like to thank the Executive Secretaries for the brief and thank the GEF for their support. The International Chemicals and Waste Cluster includes 4 legally binding instruments. Of course, we know the Basel, Stockholm, Rotterdam, and the Minamata Convention, the newest kid on the block. And then we have an international initiative, a strategic approach to international chemicals management. And all of these instruments deal with the life cycle approach to chemicals management, from production to disposal. Therefore, even though the GEF responds to the Stockholm Convention, the Stockholm Convention and the Minamata Conventions that the GEF responds to must also, in an indirect way, respond to the other conventions as well, because it is these other conventions that support the Stockholm Convention in achieving its objectives. There is no difference. There's a network of these instruments and initiatives, and that must be recognized. And just as the Executive Secretary of the Minamata Convention said, these are sustainable development instruments. They impact the economies, social well-being, and environmental dimensions of countries, and especially developing countries where, in respect of chemicals, most of us are net importers of chemicals. So we are net importers of chemicals to help to grow our economies, but yet still we don't have the capacity to deal with the waste generated. Therefore, if it is that the GEF supports sound chemicals management, albeit through the Stockholm Convention and the Minamata Conventions, sufficient resources must be put in place to allow countries to meet their international legally binding obligations and at the same time achieving global objectives and targets. I don't think there can be a separation of the two, and the failure to meet these targets is going to redound to human health and environmental health going forward. I think it's important when we speak about chemicals management that we make a difference about countries' capacities. And therefore, at this meeting, it was very important that the GEF 7 Islands project was adopted, albeit that some of us are not a part of that project. But at least it will allow some countries who don't have the capacity to manage chemicals in an environmentally sound way to advance in this regard. And so that project becomes even more important. We must also look at how it is that we deal with waste, which is what Basel is. So even though the GEF does not respond to Basel in a direct way, the POPs waste and the mercury waste becomes Basel-related matters, and so therefore we are dealing with Basel. And there are also trade-related matters, and all of these instruments have trade-related obligations. So I think we must be sure that when we make and negotiate these legally binding instruments, that the requisite support is also provided. For every meeting of the Stockholm Convention that I've been a part of, we have always added a chemical. So now we have over 20 chemicals. Some of them are families of chemicals. And if you look at the report in the GEF document that is in front of us, the reporting obligation is very poor. And I was wondering to myself if the GEF is not concerned itself as the financing mechanism on the poor reporting obligations that countries have been doing under these conventions. Reporting is a basic obligation. It's supported by the GEF, and therefore we probably will want to hear from the GEF what is their view as to what has happened here, because if funds are provided and reporting is still low, then there's still a problem that has to be fixed. When you do your report, you have inventories. Many countries don't have inventories. So we're adding chemicals, we don't have a baseline, and we're trying to do it in an environmentally sound manner. So there's a disconnect somewhere. So I think as the financing mechanism for at least 2 of the legally binding instruments, probably a deeper look is required as to how it is that the GEF can support these conventions and the parties going forward, and try to see how we can best close the gap. I know that SICOM is not a legally binding instrument, but for many developing countries, it is very important. It is also the avenue from which we also engage with the private sector. And even at this meeting, we have been discussing GEF engagement with the private sector. This is still a gap for many of us, how it is that we get the private sector to own, have some ownership on how it is that we manage our environment and their role, the role that they have to play, not just in terms of profit making. So I think for that reason, SICOM also has an important role to play, because a lot of chemicals are being traded annually, and a lot of issues are being dealt with under SICOM, and the private sector has an entry point through SICOM to deal with this, to deal with this issue. So for me, I would say that the decision in the GEF document really should speak to how it is that we, if not match, at least increase or enhance the support provided by the GEF as a financial mechanism to these legally binding instruments and this initiative SICOM going forward, so that we can actually progress globally in terms of dealing with this issue of chemicals and waste. That being said, the other issue is on biodiversity. In the document, we talk about mainstreaming of biodiversity across priority sectors. And in fact, the GEF document speaks to some tools that can be utilized for that mainstreaming. And one of the tools I see is the use of changing production practices, and through technical assistance and financial incentives. Well, the issue of financial incentives has to be dealt with within the context of national situations. So when you talk about payment of ecosystem services, we would like to see where it is that these kinds of incentives have realized concrete actions on the ground. The sharing of information, the sharing of expertise in this area is something that we would support. So basically, just to say that the GEF, being the financial mechanism for many of these instruments, probably can help the secretariats in providing a greater analysis as to the gaps that we have, how it is that we can strategically address some of these gaps going forward, so that we can advance globally in terms of management of our environment. Thank you.
Thank you. Chilean last speaker now is Chaibo.
Merci, Madame la Présidente. C'est vrai, il me manque les mots techniques pour faire un commentaire assez soutenu. Mais en tant que planificateur aménagiste et représentant de 9 pays situés presque au cœur du Sahel, vous comprendrez bien l'allure de mes interventions. Nous nous réjouissons beaucoup et vraiment de la création de tous ces instruments et d'être aussi membre du Conseil du FEM aujourd'hui, le principal mécanisme de financement pour ces instruments. Au niveau des pays que je représente, c'est des questions très cruciales qui empêchent en tout cas, notre développement. Et vous connaissez comment se posent les problématiques de gestion des déchets dans nos pays. Les POPs nous ont fait des bons processus d'inventaire. Il y a eu des actions très sporadiques, mais on n'a fait que déplacer le problème. Il faut qu'on passe à l'élimination de ces POPs. La biodiversité, le FEM nous a accompagnés. On a fait des bons plans d'aménagement de nos aires protégées, mais il faut qu'on les mette en œuvre. On doit continuer dans la mise en œuvre, parce que ces plans d'aménagement prennent en compte les préoccupations de développement local des communautés qui sont contiguës à ces aires protégées. Changement climatique, ça, je peux même me taire, vous connaissez toute la problématique. Mon pays, mon propre pays, l'économie, le PIB, le secteur primaire contribue à plus de 45%. L'agriculture, l'élevage, la foresterie, les ressources en eau, mais ce sont les secteurs les plus vulnérables. Alors, tout ça, ça m'amène à dire que vraiment, nous sommes ici une instance du moins, qui appuie le FEM pour accomplir ses missions, mais nous sommes, en tout cas ce que je sache, une instance pour l'action. Ce matin, nous avons trop parlé d'impact et du changement transformationnel. Tout cela appelle à l'action. À l'action et à la synergie aussi entre ces instruments et entre les mécanismes de financement. Si je prends le FEM, le GCF, le Fonds d'adaptation et le CIF, il faut l'ajouter, parce qu'il intervient dans nos pays. Mais aujourd'hui, on a des signaux pour ces transformations. On a des signaux, mais il faut les accompagner pour qu'on aille vers ces transformations. Alors voilà pourquoi j'en appelle vraiment à plus de ressources pour ces instruments-là. Si nous voulons vraiment agir et sauver notre humanité pour que nous puissions tous vivre dans un environnement sain. Je vous remercie.
Thank you very much, Chaibu. This concludes the round of speakers from the council side. Now we have a list of speakers ahead of us. I'd like to invite Rolf, Rosanna and Ibrahim to reflect on the comments and questions posed. Then there were questions also for UNFCCC. I'd like to invite Mr. Noah Kim to respond to that, and a question on the 5th International Conference on Chemicals Management. I'd like to invite Ms. Gertrude Zahler to answer that question. Then we'll move on to Gustavo and Chizuru to respond from their side. So first, I'd like to give the floor to Rolf, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for all the comments by the council members. I would like to thank you for all your comments. Just a few reactions. I think what came out very clear is that the issue of the GEF allocation for Stockholm, I think that is very clear, and that's been raised by two colleagues here who were together during the COPs, and so they gave their own first-hand experience in the negotiations that went on with regards to the Stockholm Convention. I would like to also highlight the comment made by the CSO on the issue of engagement of observers in the COPs and our MEA treaty discussions. This is also something that is important to continue this kind of engagement. On the issue of marinated microplastics, I think we've discussed this. We've presented the outcomes of our COPs, and I think Canada also gave a much more detailed outcomes and the implications of the amendments to the annexes. It is important, of course, now that countries be given the support and the capacity for them to implement those annexes, in fact, to address the issue of marine litter microplastics, because much of the problem is caused further upstream. And whatever efforts we do to clean the oceans and otherwise, if we don't close the tap on where the sources is coming from, I think we know where the very scarce resources will be going towards. So I think it's important to look at the issue from an integrated and life cycle approach. I think that was emphasized by one council member, to look at it from a life cycle approach. I think it's vital and important that the GEF itself is based upon this integrated approach, this looking at the linkages between different causal factors and impacts and results. So I think when we also look at the issue of plastics, we also look at it from that context as well. We would also like to comment on the fact of the reporting obligations under the Stockholm Convention. I think it's a very, very important issue. It's by way for us to also know how countries and parties, parties in particular, are implementing the provisions of the convention. This is a very, very important issue. And we also work very closely with SICAM. SICAM is a very important platform and process for us as well, because it deals with the wider chemical issue, both at the policy level, but also, most importantly, engagement with the private sector and other stakeholders. We see this as a very important aspect of the work of the MEAs, and this is reflected in some of the decisions taken by, in fact, all the three MEAs within the three MEAs that I'm responsible for. And of course, the priorities of certain countries like the African region and the Southeast Asian region with regards to dealing with the big challenges of waste management, POPs elimination. I think it should also be a high priority on the global environmental and sustainable development agenda. Thank you, Madam.
Thank you very much. Next, I'd like to ask Rosanna to respond.
Thank you. And I would like to thank all of you for your support and all the positive and constructive comments made. In particular, as regards the comment made by Jos on the COP2, which didn't provide further guidance or amended the guidance provided to the GEF at their first meeting. I would think, as Jos does, that it's because, according to the convention, COP3 is explicitly called to review the financial mechanism. And as part of that, the guidance provided to the two entities that compose the financial mechanism, and this will include the strategies, the priorities, the different categories of activities, and so on. I also note that according to the MOU, it's also the GEF Council has the possibility to update and clarify the existing guidance. We have, in fact, as I reported, we have received already the contribution of the input of the Secretariat of the GEF Secretariat to the review process. I just would like to conclude by saying that we need to continue working towards action, as Niger just mentioned. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Ibrahim, please, the floor is yours.
I also would like to thank council members for actually excellent contributions. I see that a lot of you are extremely knowledgeable about chemicals, biodiversity, climate change. It's really great to have this interaction. Just maybe to respond to a few specific questions about the global mechanism of the UN Convention to combat desertification. It's a mechanism to assist countries and to help them have access to financial mechanisms, including the GEF. So I think the GEF has its own system and with implementing agencies. So the global mechanism is assisting countries upon request. There was a question, a sort of technical question about ecological restoration, land degradation, desertification. I think, when we say restoring land, and we have a wonderful opportunity now with the decade on restoration that has been declared by the UN General Assembly, 2021-2030, when you say, ecosystem restoration and land in particular, we are talking about biophysical aspects, but we are talking about socio-economic aspects. We are talking about economic situations. We are talking about reducing migration. We are talking about helping people with health issues, when your health is affected by the degradation of your ecosystems. We are talking about security, reducing risks over access to land and water in many parts of the world. We are talking about water resources and water scarcity in many parts of the world. We are talking about food systems and helping people have access to food. So it is not a biophysical aspect only. We have to look at it from a comprehensive point of view, which is really why I'm excited about the impact programs, because they are bringing together different aspects to help countries deal with big ticket items and deal with the drivers and the root causes. Most of the time we try to address diseases by not making a good diagnosis of the situation. I think the impact programs will be helping us do that. To the CSO, and this is my last point, my final point, I'm very happy to say that at the UNCCD, the Conference of the Parties last 2 weeks, there are 2 full plenary sessions, 2 half days that are dedicated to dialogues between civil society organizations and member states and parties. One on the first week and second on the second week with ministers. So this is a very formal system whereby civil society organizations, in addition to their regular side meetings and parallel meetings, they have actually full plenary sessions for dialogues with parties. And I have to say, they have made a lot of contribution to the UNCCD in proposing sometimes actions that are taken up by parties and negotiated and resulted in decisions. So I think this is a very good way of really making a great contribution, because most civil society organizations have more knowledge than some parties. They have more science. Some civil society organizations are larger than some of the UN agencies and have more budgets, higher budgets, more scientists. So I think we should not lump them all in the same package and just say that you have the floor after everybody has spoken. I think it is important to integrate them fully into what we do. Thank you.
Thank you, Ibrahim. And we adopted our work plan yesterday, and the larger part is devoted to impact programs. I'd now like to give the floor to UNFCCC, Mr. Noah Kim.
Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon, Council members. To begin my intervention, let me just say a few words following Joseph's comment about the development under the convention. As I briefed the Council members in December last year, the world agreed in Katowice a majority of the guidelines to put the Paris Agreement into action through the climate package under Katowice. The package provides the operational framework for climate action guidance and tracking and evaluation efforts at the national and international levels. It outlines how countries will report on their NDCs, the specific actions that will take, and then how they will communicate their progress. This includes efforts to cut greenhouse gas emissions and build resilience to the inevitable impacts of climate change, as well as financial support for climate actions in developing countries. While current pledges under the NDCs fall far short of where the international community needs to go to achieve its climate goals, by finalizing Katowice climate package, nations showed they are committed to increasing their ambitions. With the upcoming UNFCCC conference next week, we are looking ahead at the work to come, in particular the need to put the final touches to the Paris Agreement work program this year, and among other agenda items under the SBI and SUBSTA relating to mitigation and adaptation, reporting obligations, and means of implementations. I would also note that in 2019, events such as regional climate weeks, regional dialogue, capacity building sessions and meetings, as well as the COP25 in Chile in December, will provide vital opportunities to collectively advance efforts and set the stage for the greater action that will be needed over the next years. Another key momentum will be the 23rd September UN Climate Action Summit, convened by the UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres, and the Secretariat is in cooperation with the UNSG team to ensure the summit is a success. I will also add to a little point to our member from Brazil has mentioned about adding the ex post to the paragraph 33. I just want to clarify that in the paragraph 33, it says on transparency, parties are decided on the model MPGs for the transparency framework for action and support. Actually, ex post element of finance falls under that. I think the modalities for the accounting of financial resources provided and mobilized through public and private interventions in accordance with the Article 9.7 is part of that sentence. So I think ex post element is hidden behind that sentence. And then I agree with also the point that parties have decided to start the deliberation of the new collective goal. I just wanted to clarify that understanding. I'm not sure if, other than the point made from Brazil, I didn't think there was any particular question, but I'll be happy to answer any questions or provide further information. Thank you.
Thank you so much. We will now move on to Ms. Gertrude Salo on the 5th International Conference on Chemicals Management.
Thank you, Madam Co-Chair. In my capacity as the President of the 5th International Conference on Chemicals Management, I wish to express my gratitude for inviting me to address the Council. I would like to thank the GEF Council, the GEF implementing agencies, the GEF Secretariat, and all those who support the Council meetings to ensure that we have a strong chemicals and waste focal area allocation. Finally, I would like to thank all Council members for their comments regarding the chemicals and waste management. This is important because the challenges we face worldwide are growing. Whereas global chemical sales are projected to almost double by 2030 compared to 2017, increases of chemical production and consumption will also lead to increased pollution and exposure. All efforts among the many involved sectors and stakeholders to eliminate the negative impacts on the environment and human health are not sufficient in the near term. Allow me to emphasize that the relevance of chemicals as a cross-cutting issue is often underestimated. In fact, implementation of focal areas such as climate change or biodiversity are unthinkable without sound management of chemicals and waste. This is not only a significant focal area and a pillar of the implementation of impact programs under the GEF, but it contributes fundamentally to the 2030 Agenda and the Sustainable Development Goals, the SDGs too. SDG areas with relevance for chemicals and waste include urbanization, mobility, construction, health, sustainable consumption and production, and agriculture. Whereas the role of sound management of chemicals and waste for sustainable development is beyond question, I see serious barriers concerning its implementation. I would like to point out at two of these barriers. First, many countries still have insufficient capacities and limited knowledge regarding the sound management of chemicals and waste, particularly in developing countries. Implementing the SDGs needs to be addressed much more forcefully now and in future. it is imperative to enhance the use of the GEF as a funding mechanism as well as instruments such as the special program, the Multilateral Fund, and the Green Climate Fund to meet this need. Second, the global governance landscape on chemicals and waste remains fragmented. This hampers the effectiveness of the work of existing MEAs, organizations, programs, and initiatives. To be more effective and to make best use of scarce resources, we need a new enabling framework that captures and creates coherence among the breadth of mandates of chemicals and waste across MEAs and intergovernmental organizations. Based on a mandate of the 4th International Conference on Chemicals Management, the chemicals and waste community is now preparing a future policy and implementation approach on chemicals and waste beyond 2020 through an intersessional process. The process has already met twice and will be meeting again in September this year and March next year. From my perspective, it is essential that the result of this process will lead to a sound proposal for a robust and ambitious new enabling framework that gives answers to the challenges of the future and overcomes the barriers I mentioned. To achieve the impact we want within GEF, but also in the context of the 2030 agenda, we need to look beyond the current implementation arrangements. We need to build on willingness of governments, UN agencies, the private sector, and, of course, the GEF, to strengthen the chemicals and waste projects across regions, sectors, and stakeholders. I would like to explore with you how the GEF can become an even stronger player in supporting countries on the sound management of chemicals and waste through the MEAs for which you are serving as a financial mechanism, but also through voluntary policy frameworks such as the one that will be adopted in 2020 on the sound management of chemicals and waste. As the president of the ICCM, I am willing to contribute to this effort. I will be honored to invite you to ICCM 5 in Bonn on 5th to 9th October 2020 to celebrate GEF's contribution to SAICM since its establishment in 2006 and to pave the way forward for a stronger collaboration beyond 2020. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much. We will now turn to Gustavo and Chizuru to give their responses.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I will address 3 or 4 questions here, and I'll ask just to respond to the others. On the question of BRS and GEF on plastics, we have had already extensive discussions at the BRS COP and this last COP on the issue of plastics, and particularly as it relates to the developments in the Basel Convention. And actually this week this was followed by the Executive Secretary and our CEO discussed further, how can we look into this topic of plastics in that context. So we will continue to consult with the Secretariat and with the Executive Secretary how we can start looking at plastics in the context of a Stockholm Convention, but also the implications of what's happening with the Basel amendments on how we look at our own projects that we fund that have to deal with solid waste management. On reporting, the Jamaica brought up, there's a table that shows how many NIPs have been made and how many have been updated. So there are quite a few, so it's a question of looking at that as glass half full or glass half empty. But we do recognize that there is a limitation for that, and we want to really speed up, particularly the revision. So we are funding a project that is helping to support online reporting to enable, number one, better reporting that's done. And this was directly in response to the recognition that GEF-funded parties were not reporting as required. And we, at the BRS COP, divulged the first version. It's kind of a beta version of this. But once completed, the system will hopefully once deployed, facilitate regular capacity. During the GEF replenishment, we included GEF 7 funds that are available for parties to update their national implementation plans. On payment for ecosystem services moving to CBD, we have actually analyzed our experience with payment for ecosystem services. There's a publication that's a website dealing with all the experience that we had. And staff did a similar study, a parallel study, covering all GEF projects. They are a little dated by now, but they cover all the lessons learned and best practices that our portfolio has identified. So I invite you to take a look at that. And it's, again, on our website. No, that's it. Just...
Thank you. I would like to provide our feedback on 3 issues. The first one is on the question of the MOU language that Joss raised. That particular paragraph you noticed in the Minamata MOU also appears in the Stockholm Convention MOU. So there is some level of consistency between that enabling Council to actually look into that particular issue for both Minamata and the Stockholm Conventions. On the question of BER and national communication support, again from Joss, we do recognize this has been an issue in terms of the lateness of the submission of the reports. I do have to say that the number of the BER support has been provided to LDCs who can actually submit their reports on discretion. So in terms of the 2-year the time period, it's not necessarily applicable compared to other non-Annex 1 parties. And we do provide support for both the national communications and BURs when we know that the previous report has been submitted to the CCC Secretariat. So there is no provision of financing for a large number of reports at once, because we basically make it clear that once it's the current one is submitted, we can provide the financing for the next one. On the question of the NDC partnership and NDC support, we are part of the NDC partnership. We will provide an update on the next relations with the conventions report so that we can clarify further what exactly we're doing as part of the partnership. And there was also a question, I believe, on what we're doing to support the NDC updating as well as support overall for the NDC. It is eligible to receive support from the GEF 7, from the climate change mitigation portfolio. And I also would like to highlight quite a number of countries are utilizing the CBIT support related to the use of NDC transparency activities to inform policy design. So as a matter of fact, 86% of the countries that have accessed the CBIT support has incorporated that particular element into the CBIT project. So that's actually highlighted in the progress report for the CBIT, which is an INF document. Thank you.
Thank you very much. If there are no further comments, we can now proceed to adopt both decisions enshrined in the documents. The first one makes us welcome the report on the relations with the conventions and other international institutions and request the GEF network to continue to work with recipient countries to reflect the guidance and national priorities in their GEF programming and activities. The second one makes us approve the Memorandum of Understanding as adopted by the Second Conference of the Parties to the Minamata Convention on Mercury and request our Secretariat to transmit this approval. Then I would like to wholeheartedly... Sorry.
No, go ahead.
Okay. Naoko, can I please invite you to add? Yeah.
Thank you. Before we close this important session, I just want to would like to take a moment to have a bit of celebration for one of our beloved council members. I think everybody knows who he is. It's Joss Weiss. Jos, you have been a long time steady champion of the GEF at all conventions, at the council, and of course, back home in Belgium. And I honestly couldn't believe that this day really has come. I'm still with a bit of kind of mode of denial. But at the same time, I do not want to miss the opportunity to share our appreciation in this in a special GEF way. So without much ado, actually, let's share with you a short and video that which captures the historical record of your support for the GEF. Do we have a video? Oh, okay.
I thought I had said it was my last intervention. Well, what can I say? Well, that was a nice collage. Thank you for being kind to me with it. because I think I have said other things also. But it was for the good, I hope. Well, this is, yeah. Oh, that's going to be a big fight, Godzilla type. But well, thanks for the kind words, and I'm a bit speechless. But I've always enjoyed this family. And as in every good family, you're not always in agreement, but then you make the best of it, and I think we have proven that we can do that. And the only wish I have for the future is please continue doing it, and then you can face all kinds of Godzillas or dragons. Because I mean, there's not much alternative, no? As I said previously, this is the place where we can tackle this, because there's so many facets that only the GEF can combine and can tackle in combination. There's no other fund, there's no other organization who can do that. Well, there's UNEP, but they don't have the funds. They come here, right? Not enough funds, okay. Yeah. So I hope that you will continue on the path of more integration and more impact. Yes, and I'm honest. And I believe in it. That's not the issue. I think that the process has been a bit rushed, as I said before, but everybody likes it. Everybody sees also Sir Bob Watson was very clear about that, and other scientists. So no, I also do agree. The challenge is to do it as good and as efficient as possible. So I see a lot of potential and energy here. So I'm pretty sure you're going to take this work further for many years to come. And thanks a lot.
Well, this concludes then our agenda item on the relations with the institutions, and leaves me to thank all presenters, also those who took the floor from the room. Rolf, Ibrahim and Rosanna, thank you very much for being here and presenting. And we can now conclude this agenda item and move on to the next one that Naoko will lead.
Peter? Can we go ahead with this?
Yes, you can.
Okay. Yeah. Yes. Okay. So now actually, the next agenda item of this after wonderful moment, we need to go back to the work and to clean up our homework. Now the list of the homework it actually gets longer, and it's now 5. So I just now want to make sure that what we do have on our list: monitoring policy, sustainability, the non-compliance of the safeguard. Then we need to hear from IDB and then IP impact program selection. Those are the 5 homework for the last day and a half. And I hope that that we can actually put a conclusion to those issues. I would like to just maybe go on this order. So would like to invite Francois. Seems busy, but Francois and to the table to actually present a revised policy on monitoring. I did it? No, it's okay. Go ahead. Well, they haven't looked at it. That's what's wrong.
They have not yet looked at it. We're in the process of distributing it. So
why
we need
don't
to.
you just, yeah.
I think we need to.
But you can explain to them. so that now that the revised policy is now being distributed, so that while you are looking at it, maybe Françoise could explain to you what are the major change based on the yesterday's discussion. Yeah.
Thanks very much, Chair. So you may not all have it in front of you, but it is in the process of being distributed. We have made sure you have a hard copy of the policy on monitoring, which includes, in different colors, the areas that are proposed for modification to acknowledge and respond to the point raised by Council in prior discussions over the importance of the operational focal point role. We have inserted a number of points, one on page 7 as a definition, another one on page 11 to make a link with the document that we mentioned yesterday, Practical Steps to Improve Coordination and Workflow in the GEF Partnership, which was submitted as an information document in December, whose purpose is precisely to define role and responsibility, and in which the role of the OFP is spelled out in much more granular details. So the reference is now acknowledged in paragraph 4 on page 11. In the guiding principles, under the paragraph C, the role of the GEF operational focal point is also mentioned. It is a key stakeholder as part of the stakeholder engagement section of the guiding principles. And in the policy requirements, there's an additional paragraph, paragraph 11, page 12, that spells out and anchors into the minimum requirements of the evaluation policy, where it is already mentioned that agencies engage GEF operational focal points in order to secure that we have an anchoring in policy for that obligation to engage and exchange in the course of the operational process, either in preparation or implementation and at completion. In addition to these changes, which are referenced in the document you have in front of you, we are proposing to bring into highlights as part of the interest expressed by council members and validated by clearly the commitment, the intent and the commitment of the Secretariat to provide access to all operational focal points to our portal, which is a process currently underway. We already have a landing space in our system for this to happen, and it will be tested for full integration in the next few weeks. We expect that within a time frame which is probably a couple of months, we will be able to have a full connection. So it's not mentioned in the policy. It's not a policy matter per se, but we will lift it in highlights because we care about it and we want it to be clear enough as an understanding. So this is the extent of the changes that we propose in response to the comments that we had yesterday. Thank you very much.
And do you have enough time to take a look at it? Okay, Anal?
Thank you very much. We don't actually have the document yet, so if we could move on to the next item so that we can get it.
Yeah, we will do so. So just, yeah. So Thanks a lot. Maybe with that, let us move on to the second item, which is actually the sustainability. I just want to also ask that if you, at least the council members, do have a recommendation, recommendation on this one.
Not yet. On this sustainability proposal, do you have it? Just to reflect our own memory, that based on the yesterday discussion, we actually commit ourselves to come back to you a kind of next step. So this is basically our proposed action for the next council meeting. And I hope that this is acceptable. Okay, so that because I don't hear any flag or the voice or the flag up, I assume that this is accepted. Okay, thank you so much. So I wonder if we could move on to either the non-compliance of the safeguard case or safeguard policy. Yeah, it's also the one-page proposal, a revised proposal. Yeah, on the safeguard. Yeah, so I'd like to ask that Françoise to propose.
So we're in response to Council's questions and requests for clarification on paragraph 15, on both paragraph 15 and paragraph 17. And in line with the earlier statement that we never meant it as a subtraction, but very much as an addition, we have reinstated in the paragraph the words that were queried, which amount to, and how such cases have been addressed, consistent with the requirements, etc., which was always the case, right? So it's back in for that representation. And in addition, in paragraph 17, in line with the request that there be a specific and timely and immediate notification to Council when new information is made available, we added the end of the last sentence there, where we notifies the Council as new information is being made available, and presents a summary of such information as part of its annual reporting on the implementation of this policy. So we are proposing, therefore, to deal both with explicitly with the reporting requirement and with the notification of Council. The modalities of that can be defined further into the guidelines that will have to be produced very shortly to accompany this policy if adopted. Finally, on the concern expressed by a number of council members that in cases where there might not be complaints, but there would be awareness by the Secretariat of representations that might constitute or might amount to a reputational risk, and what would happen in that case, we are suggesting to capture in highlights that this is a concern expressed by Council, so that this important idea and feedback that we heard from several of you would not be lost here, and to find ways of addressing it in guidelines. So these are the proposal.
Marita?
Thank you. I just have a question. When you say notify the council, how will you do that? Will you send an email in addition to the... Yeah, okay.
Well, we thought at the level of policy we may not get into the exact details of that and give some thought to the practicalities, right? It could be an email notification case by case, or otherwise, but we'll come back in guidelines on that point if that is agreeable with Council.
Stefan?
Thank you, Madam Chair. On the same point as Marita, I'm thinking now in concrete terms and having in mind the discussion that we had on this matter. I think several colleagues mentioned there's different levels of gravity of cases. So assume that there is, what we don't hope, assume that there is a case that ex ante looks like something that is relevant, sounds pretty plausible at first sight, and maybe even preliminary investigation took place. So I would expect that the GEF Secretariat flags this to Council so that you know something is going on. Assume that it happens in the middle of a replenishment process, not the negotiations that we have, but what we have to do at home in order to mobilize the funds. And something like that comes out, there can be reputational risk with impact on the bottom line of a replenishment. Don't want to complicate it. I'm just saying in the discussion that we had this afternoon, several colleagues pointed out there's different levels of gravity, and that could be reflected. More important than the wording here is, for me, the action that we will then see from the Secretariat, but it's not reflected in the decision as it currently stands. And if I understood Marita right, she also was on that.
Peter?
Thank you, Naoko. Thank you, Françoise, and the Secretariat team for working on this diligently in the course of the afternoon. Stefan is right. We had quite a discussion around this. So I'd be interested, Françoise, could you perhaps step out a little bit more about the guidelines? So this provides the hook into guidelines, which I think is the operational part, which may address some of these questions. So you're thinking about that, which might get us there. Thank you.
Apana?
So I just want to request whether my understanding is correct. I would like to just get a feedback. So there is here, as I understand, 2 levels of reporting. The agency will report to the Secretariat, and Secretariat makes available that information on the website and notifies council. This is what we expect from the council. So the issue is what is the determining, say, the filter as to what cases will be reported to the council. I think that is the question, and that, as I understand it, flows from any cases reported to their respective accountability, grievance, and conflict resolution mechanisms, which these mechanisms have determined to be within the scope of their review. So we are actually asking that determination to be done at the level of the implementing agencies within the scope of their accountability, grievance, and conflict resolution mechanisms. Maybe because GEF doesn't have its own policies. We are relying on the policies of, correct me if that is wrong, but therefore we are dependent on the agencies actually doing this determination, and so I would request that in the guidance a clear understanding should be available to the agencies so that they are able to faithfully implement the intent and the concern that is voiced in this resolution. So that's fine.
Measuring?
Yes, to come back on this issue on the different levels of gravity, I know we had a discussion on it, but I would be a bit reluctant to take it up here, and in accordance to what Peter said, I would refer to the guidelines rather than to this decision. Thank you.
Gillian, please.
Thank you. I just wanted to find out, in terms of paragraph 17, the Secretariat will report annually to the Council on the implementation of the policy. But besides that, when new information becomes available, the Secretariat is to notify the Council. Just following up on what Stefan asked, I'm wondering though, to what is the intent therefore? Is there going to be a response to the notification of anything any new information that is notified by the Secretary to the Council? So my concern is, during the process, is there going to be a reaction by the Council to this any new information provided by them, depending on where we are in the process? So, or it's just that they are sensitized that there is new information? So I just want that to be clear. So we're not expecting the Council to react to the new information. Thank you.
So let me react to some of the points. The way Aparna summarized it is exactly what reflects exactly the mechanism in place. The agencies have a reporting obligation to the Secretariat, and the Secretariat notifies Council. We could indeed, as suggested, have use the guidelines that will be produced to guide the agencies to make sure that this happens in an adequate fashion. Which is also, I understand, what the Netherlands was suggesting. So on the question raised by Peter and others, which is which has been discussed this morning, again, the accountability lies with agencies, but also the resource, the systems, and the due processes that make it possible to further the collection of information when a complaint triggers a question. We at the Secretariat do not have the equivalent, neither in resource processes or systems, and therefore we cannot exercise a validation judgment over the information that surfaces, whether through a complaint or through another mechanism, right? And we are trying in this policy to keep very clear that we do not intend to do exactly that, right? In the same fashion, we are not called upon to pass a judgment, and it's a judgment call that we're talking about when we try to assess if it's a minor point or a major point. We're not called upon to pass that judgment at our level, right? What we're suggesting is that in guidelines, we will try, having heard you, to specify what can be specified to make sure that the mechanics selected to notify council makes sense and is not overly burdensome or disruptive, or so we'll have to think about that. And also we will think through what kind of guidance the agencies might need or benefit from receiving from us in order to make that whole exercise meaningful for all, right?
Ben? Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for that, Francois. Just one bit of clarification from me, just to make sure I understand it really. I think that it's understood. It's really connected to the language you read out in terms of what would be included in the highlights, and relating to including this reference in the guidelines. And I think that Peter can correct me, of course, if I'm wrong, that he was referring to that, and just trying to understand, and obviously being new to this, understanding what you mean by guidelines, and if that's connected somehow to the Conflict Resolution Commissioner's work or not. It'd just be useful to understand actually what we're talking about when you're saying guidelines, just so we understand that process.
The language that we would lift into highlights would be intended to take note of the Council interest in the importance of and the need to further the thinking on what happens to cases that are not triggered by a formal complaint, right? Anything that we could develop in guidelines in terms of further specification or guidance or suggestions in order to make this policy more effective could not, of course, be in contradiction with what I said earlier, which is that we don't exercise validation at the Secretariat on the nature of the allegation or information that comes to us, right? So it would not include that, and it cannot include that, but it would I mean, the classic difference between our policies and our guidelines are that the guidelines provide directions and advice on how to make this more useful, and that's what we intend to take into further reflection in short order to make sure that these two paragraphs are applicable within the limits of that reservation, right?
I was just wondering that if we are all in agreement on that or not. I think the point is that I think it's I fully understand that your needs, and particularly in terms of the political needs, that and you would like to avoid any kind of supplies at the political level. At the same time, that as discussed today, and also mentioned several countries, particularly developing countries, it's a very sensitive issue, and we really cannot make a judgment that who is right or who is wrong, or that if we really do have a case or not. And that is why we were saying that we need to rely on that accountability mechanism of each agency to substantiate
that if they have a case or not, and without going through that validation process, that just to make a casual judgment by the Secretariat may not really help. So that while I fully understand that I cannot really meet your needs 100%, I think it's important for us to understand what is the limitation, the what kind of things we can do but cannot do. That on this issue, I think that to make sure that we respect this validation mechanism, substantiation mechanism of the agencies is absolutely important. Otherwise, we will create another maybe reputational risk on our side. That's something we need to avoid. But just referring to this morning discussion, what we will do and we have been doing is that whenever we came to know that case, we refer to the agencies and encourage agency to take the process it. Then that it at least goes to their own process of accountability. Then that it's also their decision to actually take it or substantiate and take it, or actually that not to take it. We just need to also respect it. So that is something we are proposing, and I hope that it is maybe the bottom line we can take. Apana?
So I think, Naoko, what we are looking for, short of having our own independent accountability mechanism, what we are looking for is actually that assurance that this decision is such that it creates an obligation on the implementing agency to inform us, and inform us within the terms set out in para 15, which is one, that case must have been determined to be within the scope of their review, and in the guidance, I hope that you will be providing some standards about how the addressing of the case should be reported to us, because there are very many stages, right? So first there is a determination of technical eligibility, then there is the decision to investigate, let's say, then there may be a site visit, after that there will be a report, then that report is considered by the board or the council of that implementing agency, and then finally they come to a decision. There is a management action response. So you will have to possibly set out those stages at which the council has to be informed. Otherwise, it will be left to the understanding of 18 different agencies. So I think if we can be assured that this language and this guidance creates an obligation that they are supposed to report, and they have to report, that will be useful, I feel.
That is really our understanding, so that as soon as the case is substantiated at each agency's mechanism, that they have obligation to let us know, and we have obligation to let you know. And each of the cases, you mentioned the stage or where it is, that I think it has to be done. So that is what we meant here. With that, I hope the proposed decision be adopted. Okay, thank you so much. Okay, one done, and I'm just Peter.
Thank you, and really just a 10-second kind of epilogue, which is the nature of the discussion here is something that Council and I think the Secretariat should expect to have in other items, whether it's around fiscal probity, compliance with any number of other policies, the desire on the part of Council to be quickly, effectively, appropriately informed when there's any identification of a breach of a standard or a guidance. So I think the lessons we learned here we can expect to play across other items. And again, I just want to thank the Secretariat's efforts for helping us to get to a good outcome. Thank you.
Yes, our commitment is here. Thank you so much, Peter. Now I wonder if we have IDB to tell us a little bit about another issue of this AML CTF.
is there any, can we hear from them about where they are towards the process?
You may want to repeat to her.
All right, great. And so that the representative IDB, Annette, and the floor is yours. There is interest from this room that where you are, that towards the how do you say? Yeah, but then we are all aware that another IDB is now adopting the new system, and then but then it would be very helpful if you could just brief us then where you are and when we could actually expect that then self-certification is done.
Thank you, Naoko, and thank you to the Council for the opportunity to speak. As was just mentioned, IDB was not able to sign the letter that was provided by the GEF. The IDB has actually adopted an anti-money laundering and combating the financing of terrorism framework. This framework is consistent with international best practices, including those adopted by other international financial institutions. In accordance with this framework, all the controls would be fully implemented by 2020. Until the controls are fully implemented, we cannot in good conscience sign the letter exactly as it was stated. This, of course, does not mean that the IDB has any lack of commitment to the provisions. However, as I'm sure the Council will appreciate, it's a very delicate issue, and we obviously have large fiscal responsibility that we take very seriously. We do access our funding through the international markets. IDB is a triple-rated agency, so we do have a lot of supervision mechanisms in place, both in terms of the acquisition of our resources, as I said, through international financial markets, through the supervision that we do throughout our projects, and also in terms of the auditing that IDB is subject to on a continuous basis. We shared our framework with the GEF, and we'd be happy to share it with the Council if that would be of interest to any of the Council members. And effectively, we consider that the framework we've provided and the implementation plan that we have is the equivalent to the action plan that was requested by the Council in case any of the agencies is not able to sign the letter. So that was the decision that the Alta Administración, the senior management of the bank, in close collaboration with our legal department and the Office of Institutional Integrity, came to. If any of the Council members have any questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
Thank you, Annette. I wonder if any of you do have actually the question for her. Well, no question means now you are assured that they are making actually the good progress towards the goal. Okay, if that is the case, may I seek your approval of the proposed decision on this issue? Thank you so much, and thank you so much for Annette. So now we want to go back to the first item, which is monitoring policy. I hope by now you may have an opportunity to take a look at revised policy with the track change. Now I'd like to, do you want to brief anything?
Seeking reactions?
Yeah, if may I just ask that your reaction, comments, questions? Okay, Mata?
Gracias, señora presidenta. Antes que nada, la circunscripción del Cono Sur, quisiera agradecerles que hayan atendido la preocupación que nosotros habíamos manifestado con respecto a los puntos focales operativos. También entiendo, como lo ha dicho François, que entonces en los highlights se nos estaría diciendo cuándo estaría ese portal funcionando para que nosotros tengamos acceso a los datos. Al respecto tenía dos comentarios chiquitos. El primero es si pudiéramos tener una fecha, no solamente que se diga que va a ser pronto o que va a ser en 3 meses o en 6 meses, porque lo hemos estado un poco pateando y como ustedes comprenderán, necesitamos esta clase de información para nosotros también poder realizar nuestras actividades de monitoreo y seguimiento en todo el ciclo de los programas y proyectos. También, y sin ánimo de, digamos, dilatar las cosas o complicarlas, si los puntos focales pudieran tener la información antes de que sea colgada, para poder analizarla, ¿no? Como digo, no pretendemos dilatar nada, pero sí nos parecería importante que tuviéramos acceso a esta información, que se podría especificar un tiempo, no lo sé, y si en ese tiempo ya no hay nada, que se cuelgue, no lo sé, alguna clase de salida, esa sería una preocupación que quisiéramos compartir con ustedes, pero de todas maneras estamos complacidos con esta inclusión, pienso que nos ayuda a fortalecernos como puntos focales y a lograr también esa tarea de apropiarnos un poco más de los proyectos dentro de los países y ser reconocidos como un actor importante. Gracias.
Adi?
Well, very briefly, thank you for the revised version, and then our constituency really supports the colleagues' comment on the portal and then also the accessibility to the data. Thank you.
Apana?
So I would also like to thank the effort. I think it's a big stretch to bring in the OFP so that all stakeholders are aware that the OFP also has a role to play and a responsibility, in fact, in terms of monitoring. As mentioned by Martha, I think we would like highlights also to be suitably expressive. And another item is, basically regarding the data work that you do on data in terms of contributing to the strengthening of countries' data standards and systems. I hope you will continue to do that work too. It will be important for the sustainability agenda also. Thank you.
Thank you. Our response?
Thanks very much. I certainly understand and relate to the impatience for the connection to be available for FPs to our system. It's difficult to provide you with a date, but what I can say is that the system is already, in a way, in existence. We have, in fact, between yesterday and today, connected 2 OFPs as a test trial, Aminata and from Ivory Coast and Miguel from Chile, just to try it, right? And so I think we can safely expect that within the next 2 to 3 months it would be fully available. Now, it is a system of restricted access, as you can imagine. It's not a web access, and therefore the next step would be as soon as we're convinced that it is properly displayed and bug-free, we would, in fact, get from each country the names of the people who are unable to connect, right? And we would then establish the connection. So it is imminent, that I can say, and it's more than an intention. It's one in which we have already invested resources and developed the content with the help of the World Bank ITS, right? So it is going to be rolled out and it will be accessible. On the point of accessing data, it's an interesting thought, and thanks Aparna for the suggestion. In the same fashion that we have found that our new system, the portal, enables, in fact, maybe some of the smaller agencies to have a management information system that allows them to manage their GEF portfolio, right? And some bigger agencies may have invested on a system of that nature and have it already, but some of the smaller ones may benefit from just the interface with the portal. We do think that this connection with OFPs could become the window through which the OFPs manage the portfolio of interventions that they should be aware of, right? And that will give them access to very specific information, for instance, in preparation on where the project sits. Is it with the agency? Is it with the GEF? Is it shuttling in terms of technical reviews? What has been said and represented? And that would be a major advance compared to the level of informal communication that they have to display nowadays to gather the similar information, and to the fact that sometimes in the process they get inaccurate information. So it's a major improvement. And certainly when it comes to the process flow of project treatment within the GEF, they should access that information readily. We cannot, and it was a specific question, we cannot give the OFP the option to clear in advance the representations brought into the system, because that would operate against the current systems of role and responsibility that we have across the partnership. Well, we can certainly, and we do, encourage agencies to do that themselves, right? I think once the information is available to all OFPs, it will be indeed the interest of all agencies to share all information in advance, rather than face a situation where the information is made accessible through the system, right? So what we hope is that the existence of that transparency mechanism will, in fact, incentivize good communication behaviors upstream, and that is very much the hope and the intent. Thank you.
Thank you. With that, I hope that this table is able to adopt a revised the decision of the policy of the monitoring. Okay, thank you so much. So the final item of this long list of homework is actually the impact program. And here we have two documents and in front of you. One is actually that it was distributed even before the lunchtime. This thick document of summary report of rolling out process for GEF7 impact program. This is actually that our response to a call for 2-pager, and it's going to be 39 pages. But this is the maybe first 1, 2 pages, and it's more like a summary process. Then a lot of attachment or annex to explain that what kind of materials are used and what kind of selection criteria is tabled and what kind of communication is done between us and the country. So that's why it's so thick. And but I hope that it may help you to kind of and grasp that where we are or what we have done. The second document, the paper, is actually the proposed decision. It's the short paper, recommended council decision on the work program. This is a kind of a but
under the item.
Under the item, okay. Under the item of the work program, but this is a standard decision from that point of view. So that this is basically that the council.
Peter is
you don't have it?
No. We should.
It's not distributed?
Yes.
No. The decision. No.
The 39 pages is really interesting.
But actually, okay, I hope by now you have had an opportunity to take a look at the proposed decision, as well as a 2-page turned to be 39-page the document. So I want to open the floor. Anna, please.
Thank you very much for all of this. I just have a quick question of clarification, and it is the information that is indicated in the draft decision. Are we to understand that this document that was circulated is in response to that? So we won't be getting any additional information?
I think as of today, we thought we captured almost everything. But because the deadline given to us is actually 2 weeks from now, we may try to see that if there are anything we can add. But the bulk of the maybe most important information is there. That is my understanding. Stefan, please.
Thank you very much. I was going to ask the same question. While this is certainly appreciated as providing some information, at least from our side, we had something else in mind, and certainly not with the intention to create additional work. But for instance, stick with the selection of agencies. Do the agencies receive the scoring? And is that something that is confidential, or is that something that can be shared with the council? I think it would give the kind of granularity and detail that could help us to get a better grasp on how the process was going.
Okay. Milena, the World Bank, sitting the floor. Is that there?
Yes.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to the council members for their questions about the process for selection of lead agency for impact program, and thank you for the GEF Secretariat for the document that circulated today. Yesterday, there were questions about the process also in regard to the Sustainable City Impact Program. And the GEFSAC provided two reasons for not selecting a lead agency the first time around, specifically that the expression of interest, which was in fact submitted by the World Bank as the only agency that submitted an expression of interest for impact program, did not meet the criteria laid out in the programming document, and that lessons learned from GEF6 were not incorporated in our expression of interest. And if you allow me, I would like to give a very short summary of the process that was followed in the case of impact of the city's impact program. We did submit an expression of interest at the same time as any other expression of interest, so back in October. And we did so by drawing on the experience that we had as lead agency for the Sustainable Cities program under GEF6. And as a matter of fact, our proposal did include 4 key lessons from the experience of the ongoing Sustainable Cities program. However, it took quite a bit of time before getting a decision on the part of the Secretariat. We received a response that our expression of interest was not accepted at the end of March. In this period, there was some consultation between the World Bank and the GEFSAC. However, it was not so much on the selection criteria. It was more on the operational modality for the implementation of the program. Now, at the time of the decision of not accepting the bank expression of interest or proposal, we did not receive an evaluation report. And we think an evaluation report would be really important to confirm the due process. We didn't receive anything similar to what the other impact programs selection processes produced. I also would like to inform the Council that the second round of call for proposal for sustainable cities includes terms of reference. They're quite different from the terms of reference in the first round. And based on our experience and based on our original proposal for cities, we decided not to submit a second expression of interest for cities. We do have a 2-pagers if for anybody that wants to have a more detailed information on the timeline and the process. And I'm available if you have any further question. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Are there any questions and comments, observations?
Kojura?
Well, I somehow find it very difficult in these circumstances to sort of take a decision on a way forward, because nowadays in the room there's a lot of not knowing how, why this went in a way it did, and I think a lot of us would like to have more background on what happened and what is going to be done next. Why did you change the call for proposals? What was the back and forth with the World Bank? Why did it last so long? And somehow I would not feel very comfortable to take a decision on this now. I don't know how others feel, and if we should not rather ask for more intensive discussions with you and explanations on the process and where we stand to assure that what we do now is the right way forward.
Elizabeth?
Thanks. I think that we are sort of in a similar situation, that we do not want to undermine the GEF Secretariat's ability to make these decisions and not micromanage your process, and be clear about that. At the same time, it seems as though this backward-looking report gives us some information on what was intended for a process, and yet it does not necessarily show us what could be adjusted or improved moving forward. And so with that in mind, I don't have a good answer, so I guess that's not a very helpful intervention, sorry. But I think it is worth thinking for a moment about how, or hearing from you on how these interventions have gone and how this discussion has gone, how you intend to think about this moving forward in your own process.
Just one small item that I'll quickly respond. I think Stephen brought the question whether the evaluation of the IP proposals for lead agencies were confidential or for open. At this stage, I don't know the answer to that, because we would have to consult with every agency that submitted proposals, see what they are actually comfortable sharing out of that process, what they might not want disclosed. And that's why we took the suggestion to report on anything additional by the end of the month, and we would have that information available to you one way or the other.
So that was maybe at least a response to the Stefan's maybe additional information you are seeking. But are there any additional requests or the comments to close this this conversation? Okay, Anna, please.
Thanks very much. I just wanted to add that while I appreciate the fact that such a substantial document was circulated, rather than have a series of annexes, I think if we are going to be given additional information by the end of the month, if it could be rolled up in a manner that actually provides an overview, so that we don't, because the annexes are interesting, but they there needs to be a story that's told behind it rather than just having those other documents. Thank you.
Anna, maybe you could help us understand what do you mean by story?
There needs to be a clear narrative behind the information that you've provided, because right now it's a series of disparate pieces of information. And I think that the request had been for a two-pager. The two-pager would be the amount of time, the amount of space it would take to actually provide an overview of the information that we've requested. And that is what I mean by a story, rather than disparate elements that are contained in the annexes.
Okay, the reason I think we attached a lot of annex is that to try to maybe share the information, in our view, that the process be quite in a sense transparent. That's what we are trying to do, and we were expecting this kind of question from the beginning of the GEF7 replenishment negotiation. That is why that the first item of this document started the replenishment negotiation resolution document, and during that negotiation discussion we detailed very, very clearly that all steps that what will come and what's the role of GEFSEC agency and the countries. So that was already documented in the first, this Annex 1, which is a part of the GEF7 negotiation resolution. So that is the starting point. So I'm trying to really understand that the steps are there that are kind of described and agreed, and what we were implementing. So all of those annexes and the information is basically it's implementation of what is all agreed. So that was maybe that we need to make it very, very clear that what was agreed and what was kind of being implemented. That may just in response to your story request, that maybe we should be able to do it.
Yes, just to complement, what we see as a storyline is actually what you have in the first page, or actually the second page when you open it, which describes every step in the process that led to the decision-making process. And we just refer in the annexes of what happened and based on what piece of information these steps were taken. So this is, in our view, is the storyline, because there's nothing really additional to this. So these steps were taken. They were based on information initially from the GEF7 replenishment programming document, and then it was further refined as we went along with different criteria. Other entities started to participate in the process, like the lead agencies, the agencies leading the child projects. The expressions of interest came in, which all integral part of putting this program together, and then all leading to the programmatic framework document that eventually came to council and it was approved. So this is the entire process. It doesn't have the actual individual proposals that came in. It doesn't have all the expressions of interest that were submitted by the countries, but basically this is the storyline.
Kojura?
Maybe just to add to Anna's point, this is a calendar that you're offering us, but what we want to know is the reasons behind what the Weltbank just explained that happened. They submitted something, they got questions, and in the end it was rejected. And what we would like to know is what were the reasons, why was it rejected, who discussed this, and what were your deliberations behind this. This is the story that we want to know, to be able to understand why in the end you decided in the way you decided, which we can only think that it has a good reason and it was right. But now that we know that this process was going on, we would like to know why it went the way it went. And this is the story. What you offer us is a calendar.
Okay, I think we can tell the story using this based on this calendar, because all materials are there and all processes, in my view, is kind of taken in a very transparent manner. So we try to write a story so that to have a much easy read about those 39 documents, page documents, or this calendar, so that see if it actually works to meet your needs to understand the process better. So that it's something actually good that we have 2 more weeks to work on that, so that and see. I hope that I can, come up with something which kind of meet your needs. Apana?
First of all, I must say that I'm really grateful that all of this has been put together in one document. So all the documents that were available to the lead agencies in order to make their expression of interest and to OFPs are now with the Council in one bunch. So that is, I would say, one step forward to help us to arrive at some level of comfort. What I would like to know, if you're comfortable in sharing as a secretariat, is what went into the decisions. So that obviously is an internal process of the secretariat. So for example, if we say that in May 2019, the PFDs for X and X were included in the work program, no decision was taken on Y, etc. If we could understand what processes, internal processes you had, and whether there was any discussion with either lead agencies for the selection of lead agencies or with OFPs for the selection of child projects. What was the nature of that discussion? How did, how was there how was that communication managed? That would be useful. That would be useful, I think, because we would like, at least I feel that basically I am looking at being comforted that GEF Secretariat has done all that it could do to ensure that agencies feel that they got, they were able to get a fair hearing, they could understand the requirements of the Secretariat. And then, of course, agencies are free to take a view whether or not to pursue their this thing. But did they get a full understanding of your requirements from lead agencies is one. Second point, which I feel that you could perhaps think whether you would be in a position to submit in the 2 weeks available to you, is I find in the papers, of course, it's only a cursory reading, that when we, second time when the Secretariat called for expressions of interest, there were a new set of terms of reference for the Sustainable Cities Program, which was not there in the earlier terms of reference. That's just my preliminary reading. So maybe that also, what are the complexities in the Sustainable Cities Program that led you to come out with the new terms of reference? That would also be interesting for us. I think it is. There will be a lot of learning in respect of impact programs, which are going to be a very important ingredient of GEF going forward. So whether there is comfort in providing this information, that's good. I mean, I don't need any information right now.
Thank you so much. Are there any comments or questions? Otherwise, I just want to respond to those requests of the story and that's what you are looking for. It's very actually that I wouldn't say easy, but definitely we can do to respond to those requests, so that now I've come to understand what you are really looking for, and we can write a informative story that and to respond to your needs. And in fact, that through that story, we can actually explain some of the questions you have already tabled, so that in 2 weeks' time, I will come back to you with those additional or revised, not the calendar or annex, but something you can learn, you can enjoy, and you feel comfortable. So so with that, is that okay that that this proposed decision can stand as it is? Apana?
Sorry, very sorry now. What I requested is not complete, right? It's just illustrative. You are free to provide whatever other information that you think will be useful, right? So I don't want to preclude your application of mine in this.
No, actually, that you already gave us a good sense of what you are looking for, so it's very, very helpful. Yeah. Okay, thank you so much. So this proposed decision stands as it is, and now we will come back to you in 2 weeks' time. Thank you so much. So one comment: could we change the July 1st?
Could we change the date of the decision to July 1st? It's just because June 30th is a Sunday, so we have a Monday to dispatch everything. Thank you.
We will work over the weekend. Yes. It's a me or you? Oh. All right. So we enter into the another item. It's other business. Okay.
Nobody said anything.
No, I'm just going to do the dates.
Okay. So is that William? You could provide some dates.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. The usual decision under this item is the dates for coming meetings. So first let me remind of the ones that we've already decided. So the 57th Council, which is the next one, is December 17 to 19 of this year. Then the 58th is June 2 to 4, 2020. Then the 59th is December 8 to 10, 2020. And the proposal for the following year is June 14 to 17, 2021, and December 6 to 9, 2021. To make this proposal, we've checked as many more or less confirmed or expected dates based on tradition of when different COPs meet and that sort of a thing. And also we always need to do this 2 years in advance, otherwise we can't reserve this room. And we need to do that now with 2 years in advance. So it may seem a bit strange to talk about 2021 now, but that's the reason why we're doing it. So unless you have some information, we try to also to look at, religious festivities and so on, so that sometimes have an impact on these dates. So hopefully we've captured most of what we could find. If anybody has a proposal or question, yes, Cordula, you want to ask a question?
Just want you to repeat the dates that you named because we were not quick enough to follow you.
Yeah, sorry. I always speak too fast. All right. So the next meeting, 57th, is December 17 to 19 of this year. Then the 58th is June 2 to 4, 2020. The 59th is December 8 to 10, 2020. Those decisions had already been taken in the past. So the two that we're proposing now are for the 60th Council meeting on June 14 to 17, 2021. That's the 60th Council meeting, June 14 to 17, 2021. And the 61st Council meeting, December 6 to 9, 2021. Go ahead, please.
I heard rumors from the 5th meeting that they liberated a date earlier this year and that there was a chance that we would not have to sit here just before Christmas.
I think we all agree on that, particularly at the Secretariat. But so I checked out with the services of the World Bank, and apparently that date that the CIFS had was actually on a waiting list. So they never actually had that list those dates available, so they couldn't pass them on to us. And I asked if we could pick up, and the answer was that it was not possible, it wouldn't work. So I'm sorry, I tried, but it didn't quite work. Marita?
Thank you. As you know, I'm very unhappy about the
Yes.
December dates, but couldn't we be put on the waiting list too?
We are on the waiting list, but we're together with several others, so I don't know if we'll be very successful, but we're there.
Thank you. This concludes the formal part of today. William will make some housekeeping announcements. Please do stay in, because we will have the report of the Selection and Review Committee on our agenda to discuss both the launch of the search for a new CEO and the evaluations of the CEO and the head of the IEO in a restricted session. But first, William, some few announcements.
Thank you. Well, really just a couple. One is that since we're trying to recycle as much as possible, when you leave, either today or tomorrow, there's a box outside for the lanyards and the plastic envelopes that hold the passes. So if you can leave those, we'll reuse them. And the other one is, well, just to remind everybody that the executive session means that only the council members, the alternates, and their advisors can stay in the room. All the rest of us must leave. And in principle, depending on what happens, the meeting for tomorrow would start with LDCF, SCCF at 9 a.m. Marita?
Sorry for coming back, but given the time of day, I would suggest that we postpone the SRC until tomorrow, because starting this discussion now, it will go on for a long time. Thank you.
Marita, I'm very sympathetic to your request, but knowing Naoko's and others' agendas, I don't think we can start later.
Thank you.
What?
Sorry?
Tomorrow, huh?
Ladies and gentlemen, we propose to really stick to the agenda and do the SRC item now. Peter promises to keep this within 40 minutes, and I'll be very helpful to make that a reality. And it also depends on the room, of course.
So
And on
we're
the
doing
quick
the
figures.
discussion tomorrow, right? No?
We're doing it now. I want to reconfirm that we really would like to do this agenda item now, because tomorrow there will not be enough time otherwise to finalize the rest of the agenda. What would be very helpful if anyone who is not a council member, alternate or advisor leaves the room quickly so that we can start imminently.
Carola, we don't have time at noon? Tomorrow?
No, there's no time at
Why?
noon tomorrow.
LDCF, SCCF.
Considering the agenda we have and also other people's agendas, there's no possibility to do this tomorrow.
What about other people's agenda tonight?
Start at 8.
Or we can start at 8. You?
Can I repeat that we kindly request everyone who's not a council member, alternate or advisor to leave the room quickly and continue their conversations outside of this hall so that we can start the meeting of the SRC. I think we are almost ready to start. If those colleagues who are not supposed to be here can please leave the room.